The reflective gateway. The Kozyrev mirror files. Before we begin tonight's journey into one of Russia's most disturbing psychological experiments, I want to ask you something. If you're enjoying this content, please consider using your hype points on this video. It helps this channel far more than you could possibly know, and it allows us to keep bringing you these deep dives into the unexplained. Also, drop a comment letting us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you're listening from. We absolutely love seeing where everyone is tuning in from, but only if you want to share. Tonight's story comes from a suggestion by Lipchin, so thank you for bringing this chilling case to our attention. What you're about to hear involves real Russian experiments, real scientists, and real facilities that operated in secret for decades. The Kozyrev Mirror project was not fiction. It existed. The question is not whether these experiments happened, but what exactly they discovered inside those spiralling chambers of polished aluminum, and why, after one particular session in December of 2003, the entire program went dark overnight. The session that went wrong. The clock read 11:47 in the evening when Anton Belikov stepped into the chamber. December 18th, 2003. The Institute of Clinical and Experimental Medicine in Novosibirsk hummed with the low mechanical sound of ventilation systems pushing cold Siberian air through concrete corridors. Most of the staff had gone home hours ago. This session was unofficial, private, the kind of experiment that doesn't appear in grant proposals or peer-reviewed journals. Belikov was 31 years old, a physicist specializing in what the Soviet scientific establishment had once called torsion field dynamics. Tonight, he would be both researcher and subject, entering the Kozyrev mirror alone for extended perception study. The chamber stood before him like a polished cocoon, its spiralling walls of aluminum sheeting catching the fluorescent lights in strange dancing patterns. His colleague, Viktor Sokolov, monitored the external instruments, temperature sensors, electromagnetic field detectors. A single video camera pointed at the chamber's small observation window. The equipment was standard for these sessions, though Victor would later tell investigators he felt uneasy that night. He said the building felt different, heavier somehow, as if the air itself had become thicker. Belikov entered the chamber at 11:51. The spiral design was based on the theories of Nikolai Kozyrev, the controversial astrophysicist who believed that time itself could be manipulated, reflected, even stored like energy in a battery. The aluminum walls curved inward in a precise mathematical spiral, creating what Kozyrev had called a temporal funnel. Inside this funnel, test subjects reported enhanced psychic abilities, out-of-body experiences and perception of distant events. Some reported other things too, things the official reports carefully omitted. The first 3 minutes proceeded normally. Victor watched through the observation window as Belikov sat cross-legged on the chamber floor, eyes closed, breathing slowly. The monitoring equipment showed expected results. Slight temperature fluctuation, minor changes in the local magnetic field. Nothing alarming. At minute 4, Belikov opened his eyes. At minute 5, he began screaming. Victor would later describe the sound as inhuman. Not the scream of someone in pain, but of someone confronting something their mind refused to process. Belikov pressed himself against the curved aluminum wall, his eyes wide and fixed on his own reflection in the polished metal surface across from him. "They're watching," he shouted. "People watching from behind the reflection. They're standing in a corridor made of spirals. Oh God, they're not people. They're not." His words dissolved into incoherent sounds. Victor rushed to open the chamber, but the locking mechanism jammed. Through the window, he watched Belikov claw at the aluminum walls with his bare hands, fingernails bending backward, then tearing away as he scraped metal in blind panic. "Don't let me go back," Belikov screamed. "The voice says I can't return, says I shouldn't return, says if I go back I'll bring them with me." Victor finally forced the lock open 6 minutes after the screaming began. Belikov lay unconscious on the chamber floor, his fingers bloody, his eyes still open but rolled back to show only white. His lips moved soundlessly, forming words Victor couldn't hear. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later, but they weren't from the city hospital. They wore unmarked uniforms and carried no identification. Security personnel Victor had never seen before confiscated every document in the lab, every hard drive, every notebook. The video recording disappeared. Anton Belikov vanished from public life before sunrise. The Institute released a brief statement the following afternoon. Research Associate Belikov has been transferred to another facility for continued work. We wish him well in his future endeavours. No one who asked about him received answers. His apartment was emptied within 48 hours. His university records were sealed. His parents, when contacted by friends, said only that Anton was recovering and couldn't take visitors. But here's what makes this case truly disturbing. The Institute claimed Belikov had been transferred, yet according to leaked security logs that surfaced years later, he was never transferred at all. He was moved to Facility 12A in Yakutia, over 2,000 miles to the northeast, to a research station that officially did not exist. The question no one could answer was simple. What did Anton Belikov see in his reflection that destroyed his mind in 5 minutes? The real science. To understand what happened in that chamber, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to a time when the Soviet Union invested heavily in what Western scientists dismissed as pseudoscience. Back to Nikolai Alexandrovich Kozyrev, the astronomer who believed he could prove that time itself was alive. Kozyrev was born in 1808 in St. Petersburg. By his 20s, he had already established himself as a brilliant astrophysicist, publishing papers on stellar evolution and planetary atmospheres. But in 1936, during Stalin's Great Purge, he was arrested and sent to a labour camp on false charges of counter-revolutionary activities. He spent 11 years in the Gulag, where many scientists died or had their spirits broken. Kozyrev survived, and when he was released in 1947, he returned to astronomy with an obsession that would define the rest of his life. He became convinced that time was not merely a dimension through which events occurred, but an actual physical energy that flowed through the universe. He believed time could be measured, manipulated, and most importantly, reflected. His colleagues thought he had lost his mind in the camps. The Soviet scientific establishment marginalized him. But Kozyrev continued his research with determination that bordered on obsession. He conducted experiments with gyroscopes, pendulums, and rotating masses, claiming to detect subtle changes in weight that he attributed to time flow. His papers were rejected by mainstream journals. His funding dried up. Yet certain branches of Soviet military intelligence took notice. By the late 1970s, during the height of Cold War paranoia, both the United States and Soviet Union poured resources into parapsychology research. The Americans had their remote viewing programs at Stanford Research Institute. The Soviets had something else. They had Kozyrev's theories about time and consciousness, and they decided to test them. The first Kozyrev mirrors were constructed in the early 1980s at a laboratory outside Moscow. The design was elegantly simple. Large sheets of polished aluminum were curved into precise spirals based on mathematical formulas Kozyrev had developed in his later years. The subject would sit inside this spiral, surrounded by their own reflection multiplied and distorted by the curved surfaces. The theoretical basis was that the spiral shape would focus time energy, similar to how a parabolic mirror focuses light. Inside this focus, Kozyrev believed, human consciousness could be amplified. Subjects might be able to perceive distant locations, access information from the past or future, or even communicate with other minds across vast distances. The initial results were, according to declassified reports, promising but inexplicable. Test subjects reported vivid out-of-body experiences. Some accurately described events occurring in distant locations at that exact moment. Others spoke of perceiving multiple timelines simultaneously, watching alternative versions of their own lives unfold. Temperature measurements inside the chambers showed anomalous cold spots that appeared and disappeared without explanation. Electromagnetic field detectors registered spikes that coincided with subjects reporting intense psychological experiences. The Soviet military became very interested. Between 1982 and 1991, the Kozyrev mirror program expanded dramatically. Multiple facilities were established across the Soviet Union, each conducting their own variations on the basic experiment. The largest and most sophisticated installation was built in Novosibirsk at the Institute of Clinical and Experimental Medicine, where conventional doctors and physicists worked alongside parapsychology researchers. Hundreds of sessions were conducted. Most produced the expected results: mild perceptual alterations, enhanced intuition, occasional remote viewing success. But a small percentage of sessions produced something else, something the researchers hadn't anticipated. Some subjects began reporting encounters with entities. The first documented case occurred in 1986. A military remote viewer named Alexei Petrov entered a mirror chamber for a standard session. 15 minutes in, he began describing a presence in the chamber with him. Not another person, he insisted, but a consciousness. He said it felt ancient and cold, and it was aware of him. It knew he was there. When Petrov emerged from the chamber, he seemed normal at first, but over the following weeks he became increasingly paranoid. He claimed he could still feel the presence, that it had followed him out of the mirror. He said he would see it in reflections, a shadow that moved wrong, a face in glass that wasn't his own. 3 months later, Alexei Petrov walked into traffic on a Moscow highway during rush hour. Witnesses said he was looking behind him when he stepped into the road, as if fleeing from something only he could see. The incident was classified. The research continued. More cases followed. Not many, but enough to create a pattern. Roughly 5% of subjects who spent extended periods in the mirrors reported similar experiences, feelings of being watched, sensations of presences in the chamber that weren't visible but felt overwhelmingly real. And in a handful of cases, visual phenomena, shadows in the reflections that moved independently, shapes that appeared when the subject looked away but vanished under direct observation. The official explanation was psychological stress combined with sensory deprivation effects. The mirrors created unusual conditions, the researchers argued, and human perception was notoriously unreliable under stress. The incidents were noted, filed, and the program pressed forward. But then something changed in the late 1980s. According to leaked memoranda from that period, the Soviet military ordered the most advanced mirror installation moved to a remote location in the Arctic. The official reason given was improved atmospheric conditions for enhanced signal clarity. The facility was established in Yakutia, near the village of Batagai, in one of the most isolated regions of Siberia. The unofficial reason, whispered among researchers who worked on the project, was that too many test subjects were reporting encounters, and some of those subjects were high-ranking military officers whose testimony could not be easily dismissed as delusion or psychological breakdown. The mirrors were no longer just tools for psychic research. They had become something else. Something that seemed to open channels to places human consciousness was never meant to access. And the government wanted those channels as far from populated areas as possible. The journalist who opened the case. Elena Marchek didn't believe in conspiracies. After 15 years as an investigative journalist in St. Petersburg, she had learned that most alleged cover-ups were simply bureaucratic incompetence mixed with human error. Real conspiracies were rare, boring, and motivated by money rather than mystery. So when an unmarked package arrived at her apartment in March of 2007, she almost threw it away without opening it. No return address, no postage marks, just her name written in careful block letters on brown paper. Inside was a VHS tape, nothing else. No note, no explanation. The label read, Kamir 03 Belikov Incident. Eleanor hadn't owned a VHS player in years. She had to borrow one from her elderly neighbour, connecting it to her laptop through a decade-old capture device she found in a drawer. The video quality was poor, the timestamp in the corner barely legible. December 18th, 2003, 23:51 hours. The footage showed a curved aluminum chamber from a fixed camera angle. A man in his 30s sat on the floor, eyes closed, breathing slowly. The video had no audio. For the first 4 minutes, nothing happened. The man simply sat, meditating or concentrating. Elena almost stopped watching. Then, at minute 4 and 37 seconds, the man opened his eyes. He stared at something off camera, his expression shifting from calm to confusion to absolute terror in the span of 3 heartbeats. His mouth opened in what was clearly a scream, though Eleanor could hear nothing. He scrambled backward, pressing against the chamber wall, his hands raised as if warding something off. Eleanor leaned closer to her laptop screen. That's when she noticed it. In the reflection on the polished aluminum wall behind the man, something moved. A shadow, perhaps, or a trick of the lighting. But it moved wrong, independently of the man's movements, and for just a fraction of a second, Elena saw what looked like a silhouette. Tall, too tall, with proportions that didn't match any human she had ever seen. She rewound the tape and watched again. There, in the reflection. A shape that appeared when the man wasn't looking at that section of wall, vanishing the instant his gaze swept across it. And then she saw the eyes. 2 points of darkness in the reflection that blinked. Not in sync with the man's blinking, but independently, slowly, deliberately. Eleanor felt her skin prickle. She told herself it was video compression artifacts, shadows from poor lighting, her own imagination filling in patterns where none existed. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just watched something that should not have been recorded. Something that should not exist. She checked the timestamp again. December 2003, Novosibirsk. But when she examined the tape more carefully, she found something strange. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, was a facility designation. Facility 12A, Yakutia. Not Novosibirsk. Yakutia. Over 2,000 miles away. Elena pulled up maps on her laptop. Yakutia was one of the most remote regions in Russia, a vast territory of permafrost and isolation. The designation Facility 12A appeared nowhere in public records. No research institutions, no military bases, nothing. Someone had lied about where this footage was recorded. Or the official story about Anton Belikov being in Novosibirsk was false. Either way, Eleanor now had evidence of something being covered up. She spent the next 2 weeks digging through archives, contacting former Soviet researchers, and following dead ends. Most people she contacted refused to speak about Kozyrev mirrors. Those who did claimed the program had been shut down in the early 90s, dismissed as Cold War-era pseudoscience that produced no useful results. But one name kept appearing in her research, Yevgeny Malikov, a former technician who had worked at multiple mirror research facilities before the Soviet Union collapsed. He had vanished from public life in the mid-90s, but Elena eventually found him living under an assumed name in a small apartment in Vladivostok. She flew east, taking 3 connecting flights to reach the Pacific port city. Malikov agreed to meet her in a cafe near the harbour, but only after she sent him a photograph of the VHS tape as proof she had evidence. He was 63 years old, thin and nervous, constantly glancing at the cafe entrance as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. His hands shook when he lifted his teacup. Eleanor showed him the tape on her laptop. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "It was sent to me anonymously. Can you tell me what I'm looking at?" Malikov watched the footage in silence. When the man in the video began his silent screaming, Malikov closed his eyes. "That's Belikov," he said. "I knew him. Good man, brilliant physicist. After this session he was never the same. What happened to him? Officially? Transferred? Unofficially? They took him to Section 7. Section 7? Malikov looked around the cafe again before answering. A psychiatric facility that doesn't appear on any maps. It's where they send people who see things in the mirrors, things that break them. Eleanor leaned forward. What things? You saw the video. You noticed the reflection, yes? The shape? Elena nodded slowly. The mirrors weren't just for psychic experiments, Malikov said. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. After years of sessions, we began to realize something. The mirrors were receiving information, patterns, coordinates, symbols that shouldn't exist, and sometimes voices. Voices? Recordings would show electronic voice phenomena, whispers in languages no one recognised. One researcher claimed to hear his own voice speaking words he hadn't said yet, describing events that hadn't happened but later did. Elena felt a chill despite the warm cafe. Are you saying the mirrors showed the future? No, Malikov said firmly. That's not what I'm saying. The mirrors didn't show the future. They showed something trying to communicate across time, something that exists in the spaces between moments. He pulled out a worn photograph from his wallet and slid it across the table. It showed a massive aluminum chamber, far larger than the one in Yelena's video. The structure spiralled upward in a cathedral-like space, its polished surfaces catching light in hypnotic patterns. The reflective gateway, Malikov said. The largest mirror ever built. It's still at Facility 12A in Yakutia. After Belikov's incident, they sealed it. But the facility is still there, still guarded. Guarded? Why would they guard an abandoned research station? Malikov met her eyes. Because the mirrors don't reflect you, Elena. They reflect something trying to be you. Something that knows when you look in. And the gateway is still active. Before Elena could ask more questions, Malikov suddenly stood up, his face pale. He was looking past her toward the cafe entrance. Elena turned but saw nothing unusual. Just ordinary people entering and leaving. I have to go, Malikov said urgently. Don't try to contact me again. Burn that tape, forget you ever saw it. Wait, I need... But he was already moving toward the back exit, leaving money on the table. Eleanor watched him disappear into the alley behind the cafe. She waited for several minutes, expecting him to return, but he never did. That night she returned to her hotel and found a message on her phone from an unknown number. They know you have the tape. Be careful. Eleanor didn't sleep well. She kept thinking about what Malikov had said. Something trying to be you. She thought about the reflection in the video, the shadow that moved wrong, the eyes that blinked independently. The next morning she learned that Yevgeny Malikov had been reported missing. His landlord said men in suits had come to his apartment the previous evening, claiming to be from a government agency. Malikov had left with them voluntarily, carrying a single bag. The police refused to file a missing persons report, insisting Malikov had simply moved away. Elena knew better. She also knew she was now in danger, but she had spent 15 years chasing stories, and this was the biggest story of her career. A secret Soviet program that might have discovered something impossible. Evidence of cover-ups spanning decades, and somewhere in the Arctic, a facility that still operated in complete secrecy. She made a decision that would change everything. She would find Facility 12A herself. She would document what she found. And she would expose whatever the Russian government was hiding in those spiralling aluminum chambers. What Elena didn't know was that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Journey to the Arctic. Getting to Yakutia required careful planning. The region was vast, isolated, and heavily monitored by military installations due to its strategic location. Eleanor couldn't simply fly into the nearest city and start asking questions about secret research facilities. She needed a cover story. She arranged a freelance assignment to write about climate change effects on permafrost communities. It was plausible enough. The Batagai crater, a massive permafrost collapse near where Facility 12A supposedly existed, had been featured in scientific journals worldwide. Her editor approved the assignment, and in late April of 2007, Eleanor flew to Yakutsk, the regional capital. From Yakutsk, she hired a local guide named Dmitri, who owned a truck suitable for the brutal terrain. She told him she wanted to visit Batagai village and document the crater. What she didn't tell him was that she planned to search for a facility that officially didn't exist. The journey took 3 days across roads that barely deserved the name. Endless forests gave way to tundra, rivers frozen even in late spring, and a landscape so vast and empty it seemed to exist outside normal reality. Dmitri spoke little, which suited Elena fine. She spent the drive studying satellite images on her laptop, searching for any sign of unusual structures near Batagai. She found something on the second day of driving. About 15 miles northwest of Batagai village, Barely visible in the satellite imagery was a rectangular clearing in the forest, too regular to be natural, and leading to it, partially obscured by tree cover, was what looked like a maintained road. When they arrived in Batagai village, Eleanor spent 2 days talking to locals supposedly about climate change, but really fishing for information about the facility. Most people were friendly, but curious about her real purpose. But on the 3rd day, an elderly woman named Katya pulled her aside after seeing Elena studying maps. "You're looking for the spiral building," Katya said. It wasn't a question. Elena's pulse quickened. "Do you know it?" "Everyone here knows it. The soldiers used to come through our village for supplies. They said they were doing atmospheric research, but we knew better." "What did you know?" Katya's expression darkened. "Bad things happened at that place. People went in wrong. Some people who worked there, after the building closed, they weren't the same. My cousin worked as a cook there for 2 years in the 90s. When she came back to the village, she wouldn't look in mirrors anymore. She covered every reflective surface in her house, said she didn't like what looked back. Is she still alive? Can I talk to her?" "She died in 2001, walked onto the ice during spring thaw, drowned in the river." Katya paused. She was looking behind her when she went in. Several people saw it, like she was running from something. Eleanor felt the same chill she had experienced watching the Belikov tape. Where is the facility exactly? Katya drew a map on a napkin. A river, a ridge, a clearing. "But I wouldn't go there if I were you. The soldiers still patrol sometimes, and there are reasons they keep it guarded, even though everyone says it's abandoned." "What reasons?" "To keep the cold spirits inside," Katya said simply. "That's what my cousin called them, the cold spirits that live in the mirrors." Eleanor thanked her and returned to where Dmitri was waiting with his truck. She showed him the map Katya had drawn. "I need to go here," she said. Dmitri studied the map and shook his head. "That's not part of our agreement. That area is restricted." Eleanor doubled his fee. He thought about it for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. They left before dawn the next morning, following logging roads that deteriorated into barely navigable tracks. The forest here felt different, darker somehow, even in daylight. The trees stood silent and dense, their shadows stretching in strange directions. After 4 hours of driving, they found the access road Katya had described. A chain-link fence blocked the entrance, but time and weather had bent it enough to create gaps. A faded sign in Russian red, "Government property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted." "This is as far as I go," Dmitri said firmly. Elena nodded. She had expected this. She gathered her camera, digital, recorder and backpack. "Wait here. If I'm not back in 4 hours, leave." "I'll give you 6, Dmitri said, lighting a cigarette, "but not a minute more." Elena squeezed through the gap in the fence and started walking. The road continued for another 2 miles through dense forest. Her GPS showed she was heading in the right direction, though the signal was weak this far north. The silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, just the sound of her footsteps on broken pavement. Then she saw it. The facility emerged from the trees like something from another world. A brutalist concrete structure, 3 stories tall, with small windows and weathered walls. Several outbuildings surrounded it, all showing signs of abandonment. Broken glass, rust, vegetation, reclaiming what humans had built. But the main building looked maintained. The doors were intact. The windows, though dirty, weren't broken, and fresh tyre tracks marked the ground near the entrance. Someone had been here recently. Eleanor approached carefully, her camera recording everything. The front entrance was locked with a modern digital keypad, incongruous against the decades-old architecture. She circled the building and found a ground-level window with a broken lock. It took several minutes of effort, but she managed to pry it open enough to squeeze through. Inside, the facility smelled of cold metal and something else she couldn't identify. A chemical scent, like ozone after lightning. Emergency lighting provided dim illumination, meaning the building still had power. Elena's footsteps echoed as she moved through corridors lined with closed doors. She found the main laboratory on the second floor. It was large, cathedral-like, with high ceilings and exposed pipes, and filling the room, like strange aluminum sculptures, were the mirrors. Dozens of them, all different sizes, some small enough to hold a single person sitting cross-legged, others large enough to walk inside. Each one was a spiral of polished metal, reflecting and refracting light in dizzying patterns. Eleanor felt disoriented just looking at them. She moved through the room slowly, documenting everything with her camera. Old notebooks were scattered on workbenches. She flipped through one and found session logs, dates, names, results. Most entries were clinical and brief. Subject reported enhanced perception. Session concluded normally. But some entries were different. Subject claims presence in chamber. Visual confirmation impossible. Session terminated early due to psychological distress. Another, temperature drop of 12 degrees recorded during contact event. Subject unconscious. Hospitalized. And another, written in a shaky hand, "The reflections are watching. They know we're here. We need to stop." Eleanor felt her skin crawl. She pocketed several notebooks and continued exploring. At the far end of the laboratory, she found a reinforced metal door. The lock was electronic but had been damaged, leaving the door slightly ajar. Eleanor pulled it open and found stairs leading down. The basement level was colder. Much colder. Her breath became visible in the air. The walls here were different, lined with sound-absorbing foam and some kind of metallic mesh. At the end of a long corridor she found another door. This one was massive, like a vault entrance, with multiple locking mechanisms. It was open. Beyond was a circular chamber at least 40 feet in diameter and dominating the space. Rising from floor to ceiling in a perfect spiral of polished aluminum was the largest Kozyrev mirror Elena had ever seen. The reflective gateway. It was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. The spiral was mathematically perfect, each curve flowing into the next with precision that must have required incredible engineering. The polished surface caught the dim emergency lighting and multiplied it, creating the illusion of infinite depth. Eleanor approached slowly, her camera forgotten. She felt drawn to it, as if the structure itself exerted some kind of pull. When she was close enough to touch the aluminum, she noticed something strange. The surface wasn't entirely reflective. In some areas it seemed translucent, as if the metal had become thin enough to see through to something beyond. She reached out to touch it and stopped. In her reflection, something moved, just a flicker at the edge of her vision. She turned quickly but saw nothing behind her. The chamber was empty except for her, but when she looked back at the reflection, there it was again, a shadow where no shadow should be. Eleanor's rational mind screamed at her to leave. Every instinct told her this place was wrong, dangerous, that she should run back the way she came and never return. But the journalist in her needed to know, needed to understand what this structure was and what it did. She found a control panel near the entrance. Most of the buttons and switches were labelled in Russian technical jargon she could barely understand, but one switch was clearly marked, Gateway Activation. Eleanor stared at it for a long moment. This was insane. She was about to activate Soviet-era equipment in an abandoned facility, equipment that had been sealed for years, equipment that had apparently driven multiple people to psychological breakdown. But she'd come this far. She had to know. She flipped the switch. For several seconds nothing happened. Then a low humming began, so deep she felt it in her bones rather than heard it. The emergency lights flickered. The temperature dropped further, and Elena's breath came out in thick clouds. The aluminum surfaces of the gateway began to glow faintly, as if generating their own light from within. Elena watched, transfixed, as her reflection became sharper, clearer, more defined than any normal reflection should be. And then her reflection moved wrong. It was subtle at first, a delay of a fraction of a second, as if the reflection was lagging behind her actual movements. Elena raised her hand. Her reflection raised its hand a heartbeat later. She turned her head. The reflection followed, but slowly, as if moving through something thicker than air. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. She should leave. She should run. But she couldn't look away from the mirror. Couldn't stop watching her own reflection behaving like something that was almost her, but not quite. Then her reflection smiled. Eleanor wasn't smiling. Her face was frozen in an expression of growing horror. But in the gateway's surface, her reflection's lips curved upward in a slow, deliberate smile. "Oh my God," Elena whispered. The reflection's smile widened. Its eyes, her eyes, focused directly on her with an intensity that felt alien, wrong. And then it spoke. Elena heard no sound, but she saw the reflection's lips move, forming words. "You found us." Every rational thought in Eleanor's mind collapsed. She stumbled backward, nearly falling, her camera clattering to the floor. The reflection didn't move with her. It remained in place, standing in the gateway's surface, watching her retreat with that terrible smile. Eleanor felt it then. The sensation that had driven Anton Belikov to tear his fingernails off, clawing at metal. The overwhelming awareness of being watched by something vast and cold and patient. Something that had been waiting for someone to open the gateway again. Something that wanted to step through. The reflection began to walk forward. Not backward as reflection should move, but forward, toward the inner surface of the aluminum. Its hand reached out, pressing against the metal from the inside, creating a visible distortion in the surface. Elena grabbed her camera and ran. She ran through the corridor, up the stairs, through the laboratory filled with smaller mirrors. Behind her she heard a sound like metal groaning, like something trying to force its way through a barrier never meant to hold it back. She reached the window she'd entered through and threw herself outside. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her camera. She ran through the forest, branches tearing at her clothes, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, through the trees, she heard the facility's emergency alarms begin to wail. Eleanor ran until she found the road where Dmitri waited. His eyes widened when he saw her state. Dishevelled, terrified, covered in scratches. "We need to leave," she gasped. "Now! Drive! Please! Just drive!" Dmitri didn't ask questions. He started the truck and drove as fast as the terrain allowed. Eleanor looked back through the rear window, half expecting to see something following them, but the forest remained still and empty. They were 10 miles away when they saw the military trucks approaching, 3 of them, moving fast along the access road toward the facility. Someone had triggered an alarm, or maybe the gateway had triggered it automatically when activated. "How did they get here so fast?" Elena asked. "They were probably already nearby," Dmitri said, his voice tight. "They patrol this area. Everyone knows that." Too fast, Elena thought. As if they had been waiting. As if they knew someone would eventually try to access the gateway. They reached Batagai village after dark. Elena paid Dmitri the rest of his fee plus extra for his trouble. He took the money without comment, but before driving away he said, "Whatever you saw in there, forget about it. Some things are meant to stay buried." Eleanor spent that night in a village guest house, unable to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her reflection smile. Every shadow seemed to move wrong. She checked her camera footage, but most of it was corrupted, showing only static and distorted images. The few clear frames showed the gateway's spiral surface, but her reflection appeared normal in the recording. Only she knew what she had seen. Only she knew what had tried to reach through. The next morning, Elena fled Yakutia on the first available flight. But escaping the region didn't bring her peace. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something had followed her out of that chamber, that activating the gateway had opened a door that couldn't be closed. Escape and pursuit. Elena reached Moscow 3 days later, travelling through a series of connecting flights designed to make her movements harder to track. She was being paranoid, she told herself. There was no reason to believe anyone was following her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that had settled over her since leaving Facility 12A. a crawling sensation between her shoulder blades, the constant urge to look behind her. She checked into a budget hotel under a false name and spent the first night reviewing what little footage from her camera had survived. Most of the video was corrupted beyond recovery, but she managed to salvage several still images of the gateway and a few pages from the notebooks she had photographed. The handwritten session logs were more disturbing the more she studied them. One entry from October 2002 read, "Subject 7 reported entity claiming to be from outside time. Entity provided specific coordinates and dates. Coordinates verified to match undiscovered archaeological site in Kazakhstan. Discovery confirmed 3 months later. How could subject have known?" Another from January 2003. "Multiple subjects now report same entity. Describes itself as observer. Says it has always watched. Says it wants to come through. Recommend immediate suspension of gateway testing." The recommendation had been ignored. Testing continued for another 11 months, until the Belikov incident in December 2003. Elena began writing her article, documenting everything she had discovered. The history of the Kozyrev mirror program, the testimonies from researchers like Malikov, the continued operation of Facility 12A despite official claims of abandonment, and her own experience in the gateway chamber. She knew no mainstream publication would touch it. The story was too strange, too unverifiable. But there were alternative media outlets, online platforms that specialised in investigating government secrets. She began reaching out to contacts in that world. On her 4th night in Moscow, someone knocked on her hotel room door. Elena froze. She hadn't told anyone where she was staying. The knock came again, polite but insistent. Through the peephole she saw 2 men in business suits. Not police uniforms, not military, just nondescript suits that could mean anything. "Elena Marchek," one of them called through the door. "We know you're inside, we just want to talk." Elena's mind raced. There was a window, but she was 6 floors up. The bathroom had no exit. She was trapped. "We're not here to hurt you," the man continued. "We're from a special research division. We know you visited Facility 12A. We know you activated the gateway. We need to ask you some questions." "I have nothing to say," Elena called back. "Then just listen. The gateway is dangerous. You experienced that firsthand, but there are protocols for dealing with exposure, medical evaluations, psychological support. We can help you." It sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. Elena remembered Yevgeny Malikov leaving with men in suits who claimed to be from a government agency. He had never been seen again. "Go away," she said. "I'll scream. I'll call the police." There was a long pause, then, "The police can't help you with this, Elena, and you're going to need help. The effects of gateway exposure don't always manifest immediately. Sometimes they take days, weeks. You'll start noticing things. Small things at first. Reflections that don't quite match. Shadows that fall wrong. The feeling of being watched even when you're alone." Eleanor felt cold despite the warm room. How did they know? How could they describe exactly what she'd been experiencing? "We monitor gateway exposure cases," the man said, as if reading her thoughts. "We know the progression. Right now you're in the early stages. Heightened paranoia, perceptual distortions. But it gets worse, Elena. Much worse. Eventually you'll see them clearly. The things that live in the spaces between moments. And once you see them clearly, they can see you too. They can find you." Elena's hands shook as she grabbed her laptop and camera. She shoved them into her backpack along with the notebook she had stolen from the facility. "Last chance," the man said. "Open the door, let us help you, or we'll be forced to take official action." Eleanor didn't respond. She moved into the bathroom, locking that door as well, and opened the small window. It was barely large enough for her to fit through, leading to a narrow fire escape she had noticed when checking into the hotel. She had chosen this room specifically for this possibility, though she had hoped she wouldn't need it. She heard the hotel room door crash open as she squeezed through the bathroom window. Shouts. Footsteps. Eleanor didn't look back. She climbed down the fire escape as quickly as she dared, her backpack bouncing against her spine. She hit the ground running and disappeared into Moscow's maze of side streets and metro stations. She knew the city well from her years as a journalist. She knew how to disappear. For the next week, Eleanor lived like a fugitive. She moved between different hotels each night, paid in cash, avoided cameras, and trusted no one. She continued working on her article, expanding it into a full report with every piece of the evidence she had gathered. She prepared multiple copies, saving them to cloud, storage services under anonymous accounts. But the men's words haunted her. You'll start noticing things. She was noticing things. Her reflection in mirrors seemed off, as if looking at her from a slightly different angle than it should. Shadows in her peripheral vision moved when nothing was there, and the feeling of being watched had grown into a constant, oppressive presence. Was it psychological trauma from her experience in the gateway, or was something genuinely following her? She couldn't tell the difference anymore. 10 days after fleeing the hotel, Eleanor made contact with an editor at an alternative media website based in Finland. He was interested in her story but wanted verification. Could she provide sources, witnesses? The stolen notebooks weren't enough without context. Eleanor decided to risk one more interview. She tracked down another former researcher from the Mirror program, a woman named Irina Volkov who had worked at the Novosibirsk facility in the 90s. Irina agreed to meet, but only in a public place. They met at a crowded cafe in St. Petersburg, Eleanor's home city. Irina was in her 50s, nervous but willing to talk once Elena showed her the notebook pages. I know these logs, Irina said quietly. I wrote some of them. We all thought we were advancing science, exploring the boundaries of human consciousness. We didn't realise what we were actually doing. What were you doing? Opening doors, creating channels. The mirrors don't just reflect physical light. They create resonances in whatever field consciousness exists in, and something on the other side of that field noticed. Something that had been waiting for a very long time. Waiting for what? For a way through, Irina said. That's what we eventually realised. The entity's subjects reported weren't hallucinations. They were real presences existing in dimensions or states we don't have words for. And the mirrors, especially the gateway, were creating weak points where those presences could push through into our reality. Elena leaned forward. Did anyone ever make it through? Did anything ever cross over completely? Irina's expression darkened. There were incidents, cases where test subjects changed after prolonged exposure, subtle changes at first, different speech patterns, different behaviour, like something was wearing them. We called them contamination cases. They were sent to Section 7 for observation. What happened to them? I don't know. Section 7 cases were classified above my clearance. But I heard rumours. People said the contaminated subjects weren't people anymore. They looked like people, moved like people, but something else was looking out through their eyes. Before Eleanor could ask more questions, Irina suddenly stiffened, staring past Elena's shoulder toward the cafe entrance. Elena turned and saw 3 men in suits entering. They weren't looking around like normal customers. They were scanning the room with purpose. Time to go, Irina whispered. They left through the back exit and separated immediately. Eleanor took a taxi to the train station, then caught a train heading south. She spent the journey looking out the window, watching her reflection in the dark glass. Her reflection was smiling. Eleanor blinked and looked again. Her reflection was normal now, showing her actual expression of fear and exhaustion. But for a moment, she had seen it. That same deliberate smile from the gateway chamber. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and recorded a video message. Speaking quickly and quietly, she summarised everything she had discovered. The Kozyrev Mirror program, Facility 12A, the gateway, the entities, the contamination cases. She uploaded the video to multiple cloud storage accounts and set them to automatically publish if she didn't check in within 48 hours. If something happened to her, at least her research would survive. The final transmission, the last known communication from Elena Marchek, came in the early morning hours of May 15th, 2007. She called her editor from a disposable phone. Her voice rushed and tight with panic. "They found me," she said. "I don't know how, but they found me. I'm in Pskov, near the Estonian border. I was going to try crossing, but there are men watching the roads. They're dressed like civilians, but I know they're looking for me." Her editor tried to keep her calm, told her to go to the police, to the embassy, anywhere safe. "You don't understand," Eleanor said. "It's not just them. There's something else. I keep seeing it. My reflection. It's following me. Every mirror, every window, every reflective surface. It's always there. Always watching. Always smiling. Sometimes I see it when there shouldn't be any reflection at all." There was a long pause on the recording. "I think I brought something back from the gateway," Eleanor continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or maybe it followed me. Maybe activating that machine created a connection, a channel, and now it's using that channel to find me, to get closer." Her editor asked if she was okay, if she needed medical help. "I'm not crazy," Eleanor said firmly. "I know how this sounds, but I saw the reports from Facility 12A. I know what happens to people with prolonged gateway exposure. First the reflections act strange, then you start seeing things that aren't there. Then you realise they are there, and they've always been there, and the gateway just made you able to see them." Another pause. "I sent you everything," Elena said. "All my research, the notebooks, the photographs, the interviews. If something happens to me, you have to publish it. People need to know what the government was doing, what they're still doing, what they found in those mirrors." Her editor promised to publish everything, asked her to stay safe, to stay hidden until they could figure out how to help her. "It's too late for that," Elena said. "I can feel it getting closer. It's not just in reflections anymore. Sometimes I see it standing in corners where there shouldn't be shadows. Sometimes I hear it whispering in voices I recognise. My mother's voice, my own voice, saying things I never said." The line went quiet except for Elena's breathing. Then, "There's someone at my door. Multiple people. They're not knocking, just standing there. I can see their shadows under the door." Her editor told her not to open it, to stay quiet, to wait for them to leave. "I don't think they're going to leave," Eleanor said, "and I don't think they're people, not anymore. I can see their reflection in the window. They're standing at my door, but their reflections are all wrong. Too tall, too thin, moving independently of their bodies." Muffled sounds came through the phone. Footsteps, a door opening, Elena's sharp intake of breath. "They're wearing uniforms," she said. "Government identification, but their eyes are wrong. They're looking at me, but also through me, at something behind me." A man's voice in the background, speaking Russian. "Elena Marchek, you need to come with us." "Where are you taking me?" Eleanor's voice on the recording. "Section 7. For observation and treatment. You've been exposed to harmful energies. We can help you." Eleanor laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. "Section 7. Where the contaminated cases go. That's not a hospital. That's where you put people who've been replaced. People who aren't people anymore. Please don't make this difficult." "What happened to the real people?" Elena asked. "The ones who came back from the gateway changed. Where are they? Are they still in there somewhere, trapped in their own bodies while something else wears them like clothing?" No answer from the men. "That's what happened to Belikov, isn't it?" Elena continued. "That's why he screamed about people watching from behind the reflection. Because there were people trapped on the other side, and things wearing their faces over here." The recording became confused, sounds of struggle, Elena shouting, then sudden silence. When her editor called back, the phone was disconnected. Elena Marchek disappeared that night. The police in Pskov had no record of any incident at the hotel where she had been staying. The hotel itself claimed no one by her name had been registered. Her credit cards went unused. Her phone stayed offline. Her apartment in St. Petersburg was found empty, cleaned out completely. Friends and family were told she had left the country suddenly for a freelance assignment. No one could say where. After several months with no contact, she was officially listed as a missing person. After a year, most people assumed she was dead. But the story doesn't end there. The horror twist. 14 months after Elena Marchek's disappearance, a file appeared on several encrypted forums popular among conspiracy theorists and government whistleblowers. The file was labelled simply, "Mirror Contamination Contained." Inside was a single-page document, heavily redacted from an organisation identifying itself only as Research Division 7. The document read, "Subject EM retrieved successfully on May 15, 2007. gateway exposure confirmed via psychological markers and physiological indicators. Subject displayed advanced contamination effects including autonomous reflection behaviour and transtemporal perception bleed. Standard containment protocols implemented. Subject showed resistance during initial processing but cooperation achieved through therapeutic intervention. Replacement integration deemed successful after 32-day observation period. Subject released into population on June 20, 2007. Monitoring continues. Mirror contamination contained. No risk to civilian population. Case closed. Attached to the document was a grainy security camera photograph. The timestamp read June 22, 2007. The location, Leningradsky railway station in Moscow. The photograph showed Elena Marchek walking through the crowded terminal, carrying a small bag dressed in casual clothes. She looked healthy, normal, like any other traveller passing through one of Russia's busiest stations. But something was wrong with the photograph. Something that made anyone who studied it closely feel a crawling sensation in their spine. Eleanor's reflection in the glass wall behind her wasn't quite right. The angle was slightly off. The timing was delayed by a fraction of a second. And most disturbing of all, the reflection was smiling. Not the smile of someone happy to be travelling, not the smile of pleasant anticipation, but a slow, deliberate smile that didn't match Eleanor's neutral expression in the photograph. A smile that suggested something behind her eyes was pleased to be walking free in the world. The leaked document spawned immediate debate. Was it real or fabricated? Was Elena actually alive, or was this disinformation? Several people claimed to have seen her in Moscow, St. Petersburg, even as far away as Berlin. But no one could produce concrete evidence. Her editor tried to verify the sighting, but hit dead ends everywhere. The security footage from that day at Leningradsky station had been erased. The station authorities denied any record of the original image, but the photograph circulated online, analysed and debated by thousands of people. Image analysis experts pointed out the reflection anomaly. Skeptics called it doctored. Believers saw it as proof that something had been done to Elena Marchek, that she'd been taken, processed and sent back as something else, something wearing her face. The debates continue to this day. Some people claim to have encountered Elena in various Russian cities, always noting something off about her behaviour. Too calm, too controlled, speaking in patterns that don't quite sound natural. And always, smiling at odd moments. Others say these sightings are mistaken identity or hoaxes. That Elena Marchek died in 2007, probably killed to silence her investigation. That the leaked document and photograph are elaborate disinformation designed to discredit her research. But those who study the Kozyrev mirror program closely, who have dug through the fragmentary records and talked to surviving researchers, they tell a different story. They say the mirrors weren't just tools for psychic research. They were gateways to something else, something that exists in the spaces between moments, in the gaps between one instant and the next, something that watches from reflections, something that knows when you look, something that has been waiting for a very, very long time to find a way through. And perhaps, after decades of experiments and hundreds of test subjects, it finally succeeded. Not through direct manifestation, which seems to be impossible, but through replacement, through wearing people like clothing, walking around in stolen bodies, learning to move and speak and smile just enough like the original to avoid detection. The Kozyrev mirror program is officially defunct. Facility 12A is officially abandoned. The gateway is officially sealed. But satellite imagery from 2012 showed fresh tyre tracks in the snow outside the facility, and leaked communications from 2015 reference ongoing temporal perception research at undisclosed locations. Some programs never truly end. They just go deeper underground. They continue in places with no names, monitored by organisations with no public existence, studying phenomena that officially don't exist. And somewhere, in some secure facility buried beneath permafrost or hidden in empty steppe, the gateway still stands. Its spiralling aluminum surfaces still gleam. Its mathematical curves still focus something that shouldn't be focused. still creating channels, still opening doors, still letting things through, things that know how to smile at the right moments, things that have learned to wear human faces, things that walk among us, watching from behind stolen eyes, waiting for the next person to activate another gateway, waiting to bring more of their kind across. And every time you look in a mirror, every time you catch your reflection in a window or a screen, remember Elena Marchek. Remember how her reflection smiled before she did. Remember that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. Remember that something might be looking back, something that's learning, something that's waiting for its turn to step through. The Kozyrev mirror program is over, they tell us. The research has been discontinued, they assure us. The facilities are sealed, they promise. But promises are easy to make when the truth is too disturbing to acknowledge. When the truth is that we opened a door to something vast and patient and utterly alien. Something that exists just beyond the moment, just outside perception, waiting in the spaces between heartbeats and thoughts. Something that finally found a way to cross over. And it's learning to be human, one reflection at a time. This has been the story of the reflective gateway, the Kozyrev mirror files, and what Russian researchers may have discovered in those spiralling chambers of aluminum. Whether you believe it or not, whether you think Elena Marchek is alive or dead, replaced, or simply vanished, remember one thing. Pay attention to your reflection. Watch how it moves. Notice if it smiles when you don't. Because once you see it happening, once you see your reflection acting independently, even for a fraction of a second, you'll know what the researchers at Facility 12A discovered in their final experiments. You'll know that something is watching from the other side, and now that you're paying attention, it knows you can see it too. Sleep well. Have you ever wondered why ancient monuments across the globe seem to align with mathematical precision? Why your GPS glitches in certain locations? Or why governments classify research about electromagnetic anomalies? Tonight's story might make you question every map you've ever trusted. Before we begin this journey into the hidden grid beneath our feet, I want to thank M10 Rapin for suggesting this topic. Your video ideas fuel these late night tales, so please leave your suggestions in the comments below. And if you're ready to uncover the mysteries that keep you awake at night, make sure to like and subscribe to Sleep Theories. Now, dim your lights, settle in, and prepare to discover the truth about the lines that connect our world. My name is Alex Morrison, and I used to believe maps told the truth. As a GIS analyst, that's Geographic Information Systems for those who don't spend their days staring at satellite data and topographical overlays, I thought I understood how the world was organised. Cities here, mountains there, rivers cutting through valleys in predictable patterns carved by millions of years of erosion. Everything had a logical explanation. Everything could be mapped, measured and catalogued. That was before I found the pattern. It started innocently enough. Tuesday morning, October 15th, 8:47 a.m. I was hunched over my dual monitors in a cramped office in Brussels, working for Steinberg Construction Consortium. They'd hired me to evaluate potential sites for a new high-speed rail corridor that would connect Prague to Paris, part of the EU's Green Transportation Initiative. Routine work: overlay environmental data, check for protected sites, identify geological challenges. I'd done it 100 times before, but this time something was different. I was cross-referencing archaeological databases with our proposed route when I noticed it. A series of Neolithic monuments, stone circles, burial mounds, ancient wells, formed an almost perfect line across the landscape. Not just a few sites clustered together, but dozens of them, stretching for hundreds of miles. The proposed railway cut directly across this invisible corridor. At first, I laughed it off. Pattern recognition gone wild, I told myself. The human brain loves to find connections when none exist. But then I pulled up the magnetic anomaly data from the European Space Agency's swarm satellites. The coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. The magnetic variations followed the exact same line. Every single monument sat on a point of electromagnetic disturbance. The precision was impossible. We're talking about structures built 5,000 years apart by cultures that supposedly never interacted, aligned within meters of a magnetic corridor that modern science had only just detected. I should have deleted the file, should have marked the route as approved and moved on with my life. Instead, I zoomed out. The line didn't stop at the edge of my survey area. It continued east through Romania, Turkey, Iran, west through England, across the Atlantic. I pulled up global archaeological databases, my fingers trembling as I plotted point after point. Stonehenge, Avebury, the Externstein, the Oracle at Delphi. Each site fell perfectly along extended trajectories of the same geometric pattern. My phone buzzed. A text from my supervisor. "Morrison, railway assessment due by noon. Stop whatever rabbit hole you're going down." But I couldn't stop. I'd found something that shouldn't exist. A planetary grid mapped by ancient peoples who supposedly thought the Earth was flat, following electromagnetic patterns we'd only discovered in the last century. Either I was losing my mind or I'd stumbled onto the greatest archaeological discovery of the millennium. I chose to believe the latter. That was my first mistake. 3 weeks later, I stood in a frost-covered field 40 kilometres outside Prague, watching my equipment fail in ways that defied every principle of engineering I knew. After discovering the alignment, I'd convinced Steinberg to let me conduct field surveys along the proposed route. Geological stability assessment, I'd called it. What I really wanted was to stand on one of these intersection points myself, to take readings that might explain how ancient peoples had detected magnetic anomalies without compasses or magnetometers. The morning had started normally enough. I'd parked my van on a dirt road near the village of Holubice, unloaded my survey equipment, and hiked 2 kilometres to the first monument site, a circle of weathered standing stones that locals called Devil's Dance. The temperature hovered just above freezing, and mist clung to the valleys like cotton wool. I set up my differential GPS unit first, waiting for it to lock onto satellites. The device chirped, showing full signal strength. Then, as I walked toward the centre of the stone circle, the screen flickered. Acquiring satellites. Signal lost. Acquiring satellites. I checked my phone. Same problem. The GPS app showed my location jumping wildly, placing me first in Prague, then Vienna, then somehow in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. My professional-grade survey unit, accurate to within centimetres under normal conditions, couldn't even determine which continent I was on. The electromagnetic field meter came next. The moment I switched it on, the needle slammed against the maximum reading and stayed there, quivering like it was fighting against invisible restraints. I'd seen similar readings near power lines or transformer stations, but we were in the middle of farmland. The nearest electrical infrastructure was kilometres away. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around. An elderly woman stood at the edge of the field, wrapped in a thick wool shawl. Her face was deeply lined, her eyes the pale blue of winter sky. "I'm sorry," I called out in my broken Czech. She switched to accented English. "This place. It's not for outsiders, not for their machines." She gestured at my equipment with a gnarled finger. I'm just conducting surveys for the railway, I explained, walking toward her, making sure the ground is stable. She laughed, but there was no humour in it. Stable? This line has been here since before the first stones were raised, before your railways, before your cities. Our ancestors knew to respect it, to build their monuments as, anchors, to keep the energy flowing properly. Energy? I pulled out my tablet, showing her the magnetic anomaly map. You mean this? You know about the electromagnetic patterns? Her eyes widened. For a moment she looked genuinely frightened. You've mapped it. The whole grid? She grabbed my arm with surprising strength. You must stop. Some knowledge isn't meant to be documented. They will come for you if you continue. Who will come? But she was already walking away, moving faster than seemed possible for someone her age. The ones who already know, she called back. The ones who've always known. I wanted to follow her, to demand answers, but my drone chose that moment to fall out of the sky. No warning, no gradual descent. 1 second it was hovering steadily. The next it dropped like a stone, smashing into the frozen ground 20 metres away. As I ran to retrieve it, I noticed something through the trees, a structure that didn't belong. Hidden behind a thick stand of pines was a concrete building, brutalist in design, with narrow windows like suspicious eyes. Military architecture, Cold War era by the look of it. The smart thing would have been to leave immediately. Instead, I collected my broken drone and hiked toward the building. The structure was abandoned but not ancient. Rust streaked the metal door, which hung open on failing hinges. Inside, fluorescent lights dangled from exposed wiring, and the walls were covered in mould that formed patterns like continental drift. But it was the maps that stopped me cold. The entire north wall was covered in them. Topographical maps, geological surveys, electromagnetic readings, layers upon layers of data, some dating back to the 1960s. Red strings connected pins at various locations, creating a web that stretched across Europe. And running through it all, marked in thick black ink, was the same line I'd found, the same impossible alignment. In the corner, barely legible, someone had written, Earth Grid Project, classified, destroy after review. I pulled out my phone to photograph everything, but the camera wouldn't focus. Every image came out distorted, as if the very air in the room was bending light. I tried sketching what I saw instead, my hands shaking from more than cold. A metal filing cabinet in the corner had been forced open, its contents mostly removed or destroyed, but wedged behind the bottom drawer I found a single folder. Water damage had made most of it illegible, but I could make out fragments. Electromagnetic conductivity peaks at intersection points. Ancient structures appear to function as regulatory nodes. Catastrophic potential if grid destabilizes. Project terminated by Joint Commission directive. The last page was a photograph, grainy but unmistakable. It showed a massive antenna array in what looked like Alaska, the same distinctive design I'd seen in conspiracy documentaries about HAARP. But this photo was dated 1971, decades before HAARP officially existed. A sound outside made me freeze. The crunch of footsteps on frost. Multiple sets, moving with military precision. I shoved the folder inside my jacket and slipped out the back window, dropping into a thorny hedge that tore at my clothes. Through the trees, I could see dark vehicles pulling up to the building, men in unmarked uniforms spreading out to surround it. I ran, not toward my van, they'd certainly have someone watching it, but deeper into the forest, following a deer trail that wound toward the next village. Behind me I heard shouting in a language I didn't recognise, not Czech, not German, something else. It took me 4 hours to circle back to my vehicle, approaching from the opposite direction through farmland. The van was untouched, but I knew they'd let me go, let me run. They wanted to see what I'd do next, who I'd contact. As I drove away, hand steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I realised the old woman had been right. Some knowledge wasn't meant to be documented, but it was too late now. I'd seen the grid, seen evidence that governments knew about it, had studied it, had classified it, and I was going to find out why. My apartment in Brussels became a command centre for obsession. After the encounter at Holubitty, I'd returned to work, filed a bland report recommending further geological assessment, and pretended everything was normal. But every evening, I locked my door, pulled the blinds and dove deeper into the mystery. The coffee table disappeared under printed maps. The walls became a spider web of string and pins connecting sites across continents. I'd stopped sleeping more than 3 hours a night, surviving on espresso and the electric thrill of discovery. The pattern was everywhere once you knew how to look. Start with the obvious ones, the monuments everyone knows, the pyramids of Giza, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, Easter Island. Plot them on a globe, not a flat map, and they form geometric relationships so precise they could have been placed by satellite guidance. The Great Pyramid sits at the exact centre of Earth's landmass. Easter Island is antipodal to the Indus Valley civilization sites. Angkor Wat, the Nazca Lines, and Easter Island form a perfect Great Circle route, but those were just the famous nodes. The real revelation came when I started plotting lesser-known sites. Every major ancient city sat on the grid. Babylon, Persepolis, Constantinople, Carthage, all built at intersection points where multiple energy lines converged. The Romans, master engineers, had built their road system following these same invisible highways. The Silk Road traced a major east-west corridor. Even modern cities clustered around the same points: New York, London, Tokyo, Cairo. It wasn't random. It couldn't be. I pulled declassified documents from every database I could access. The US Freedom of Information Act, the UK National Archives, leaked Soviet files from the fall of the USSR. Most of it was useless. Budget reports, personnel transfers, bureaucratic minutiae. But buried in the noise were fragments of something bigger. Project Stargate, the CIA's remote viewing program, included maps marking psychic hotspots that matched my grid lines perfectly. Operation Paperclip scientists had studied Earth radiation patterns in the 1950s. The Soviets had run something called Program Sputnik Grid that involved placing sensors at ancient monument sites across their territory. The most intriguing find came from a 1962 Canadian military report about the construction of the DEW line, the distant early warning radar system across the Arctic. An engineer named Captain Lawrence Brennan had noted persistent electromagnetic anomalies at certain locations that required special shielding for equipment. His proposed sites for radar stations, plotted on my grid, formed a perfect arc along a major ley line. But the document that changed everything was a leaked memo from 1997, source unknown, that had circulated on conspiracy forums before being scrubbed from most of the internet. I found it cached on an obscure Russian server. 2. Joint Chiefs Special Projects Division Aura. Earth grid stability concerns. Recent seismic activity correlates with disruption of natural electromagnetic corridors via urban development and mineral extraction. Recommendation: establish monitoring stations at key intersection points under cover of telecommunications infrastructure. See attached list of priority sites. The attached list was gone, but the implication was clear. They knew. The military, the intelligence agencies, the energy companies, they all knew about the grid, and they were using it. I started mapping modern installations against the ley lines. The correlation was undeniable. HARP in Alaska, ISCAT in Norway, Sura in Russia, Arecibo in Puerto Rico. Every major ionospheric research facility sat directly on an intersection point. The Large Hadron Collider at CERN traced a circle around one of the most powerful convergent zones in Europe. Nuclear power plants clustered along the lines. Major military bases were built at intersection points. Even the routes of underground fibre optic cables followed the ancient paths, as if modern engineers were unconsciously drawn to the same energy corridors their ancestors had marked with standing stones. My phone rang at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Unknown number. Stop digging. The voice was electronically distorted, genderless. Who is this? Someone trying to help you. You found the grid. Congratulations. Now forget about it before you end up like the others. What others? Bruce Cathy, John Michel, Ivan Sanderson. All the researchers who got too close to the truth. Heart attacks, car accidents, sudden illnesses. Very convenient. My blood chilled. I knew those names. Independent researchers from the 60s and 70s who'd written about Earth energy grids. All died relatively young under questionable circumstances. Why are you warning me? Because the grid is destabilizing. The ancients built monuments as regulators, keeping the energy in balance. Modern construction is disrupting the flow. Mumbai, 2006. Haiti, 2010. Fukushima, 2011. Those weren't random natural disasters. They were pressure releases along fractured ley lines. That's impossible. Electromagnetic fields don't cause earthquakes. The voice laughed, bitter and electronic. The electromagnetic fields are just what we can measure. The grid is deeper than that. It's the planet's nervous system, its circulation, and we're giving it a stroke, one skyscraper at a time. Then we need to warn people. With what evidence? Mystical energy lines, ancient wisdom. You'll be dismissed as a crackpot. Unless ... The voice paused. Unless you can prove the energy is real, measurable, usable. How? Return to the grid, not with standard equipment. That's designed to filter out the frequencies you need to detect. Build your own sensor. Copper coils, crystal oscillators, very specific specifications. I'm sending you the plans now. My laptop pinged with an encrypted file. One more thing, the voice said. When you record the surge, you'll have about 6 hours before they track the signature back to you. Use that time wisely. The line went dead. I opened the file. The schematic looked like something Tesla might have designed after a fever dream. Multiple copper coils in a complex geometric arrangement, connected to crystal oscillators and frequency analyzers. The materials list was surprisingly mundane. Everything available from electronic suppliers. It took me 3 days to build it, working in secret in a rented storage unit outside the city. The device looked like abstract art more than scientific equipment, all gleaming copper spirals and crystal matrices. But when I powered it on, every LED lit up green. It was detecting something. Now I just had to be crazy enough to test it. The academic forum was my first mistake. Well, second, if you count building the sensor. But hubris makes fools of us all, and I needed someone, anyone, to verify I wasn't losing my mind. GeoAnomalies.net was a small community, mostly graduate students and professional geologists sharing unusual findings. I created a throwaway account and posted a conservative summary. Electromagnetic anomalies correlating with ancient monument placement, seeking peer review. I attached 3 images, my overlay map of European sites, a graph showing magnetic field fluctuations, and 1 photo from the abandoned military outpost with the classified stamps carefully cropped out. Within an hour, I had 2 responses. A geology professor from Munich confirmed similar observations near Bronze Age sites. A student from Oxford posted links to academic papers about telluric currents, natural electrical currents that flow through the Earth's crust. Then, 90 minutes after posting, my thread vanished. Not deleted with a removed by moderator message. Gone, like it had never existed. The cached version on Google disappeared. The other users who'd responded found their comments erased from their own post histories. My laptop screen flickered. A chat window opened without my input. Admin. Your recent activity has been flagged for review. Me. What activity? Who is this? Admin. Consider this a courtesy warning. Cease your current research immediately. Me. Or what? Admin. Or we stop being courteous. The chat window closed itself. When I tried to screenshot the conversation, my laptop blue-screened. It took 20 minutes to restart, and when it did, my hard drive had been wiped. Not formatted, wiped. Every sector overwritten with random data multiple times. A technique that made recovery impossible. Thank God for cloud backups, I thought, logging into my secure server. Empty. 3 years of research, gone. Even my email accounts had been purged. I still had physical copies of the most important findings, hidden in a safety deposit box across town. But the message was clear. They could reach me anywhere, any time. The next morning I arrived at work to find my keycard deactivated. Security escorted me to a conference room where my supervisor, Mr. Steinberg himself, sat with two people I'd never seen before. A woman in a severe black suit and a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite, both with a kind of posture that screamed military. "Alex," Steinberg began, sweating despite the air conditioning, "these representatives from the European Infrastructure Security Division have some concerns about your recent surveys." I'd never heard of the European Infrastructure Security Division. I doubted it existed on any official registry. The woman smiled without warmth. "Mr. Morrison, your work on the railway project has been exemplary. However, we've noticed some unusual patterns in your research that fall outside the project's scope." "I'm thorough," I said. "I investigate all factors that might affect construction, including archaeological sites hundreds of kilometres from the proposed route." The man's accent was impossible to place. "Including electromagnetic phenomena that have no bearing on rail safety." "I believe they do have bearing. What you believe is irrelevant." The woman pulled out a tablet showing my deleted forum post. "Discussing classified military research on public forums is a serious offence." "Classified? I found those maps in an abandoned—" "Mr. Morrison," her voice could have frozen helium, "you're being terminated from this project, effective immediately. Your severance package is generous, contingent on signing this NDA." She slid a document across the table. "You'll cease all research related to electromagnetic anomalies, ancient monuments, or what you call ley lines. Any violation will result in prosecution under the European Security Act." I looked at Steinberg. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "And if I refuse?" The man leaned forward. "Your visa expires in 6 weeks. Your bank accounts are already frozen pending investigation of potential fraud. Your academic credentials are under review. Would you like me to continue?" The threat was clear. Sign and walk away with something, or lose everything and possibly face imprisonment. I signed. They confiscated my company laptop, my access badges, even my parking pass. The woman handed me a business card with no name, just a phone number. "If you remember any details you'd like to share about your research, call this number. We reward cooperation." I was escorted out of the building like a criminal, my colleagues staring as security watched me pack my desk. The personal items fit in a single cardboard box: a coffee mug, some photos, a stress ball shaped like Earth. They even checked those before letting me leave. On the tram ride home, I noticed the man 3 seats back. Grey coat, newspaper held too high, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. When I got off 2 stops early, he followed. When I ducked into a cafe, he positioned himself across the street. They were watching me. Fine, let them watch. That night I made a decision. If they wanted to threaten me, surveil me, erase my work, they'd already shown their hand. Whatever was hidden in the Earth's electromagnetic grid was important enough to destroy careers over, which meant it was important enough to risk everything to expose. I had one advantage. The sensor I'd built was hidden in the storage unit, registered under a false name paid in cash. They didn't know about it yet. The anonymous contact had said I'd have 6 hours after recording the surge before they tracked it. 6 hours to gather proof and upload it somewhere they couldn't reach. I started planning. The winter solstice seemed appropriate. December 21st, the longest night of the year, when ancient monuments worldwide align with celestial events. If the Earth's energy grid responded to cosmic cycles, this would be the night to prove it. I chose a site carefully, the intersection of 3 major ley lines near Carnac in Brittany, France. The famous stone rows there were just the visible part of a massive Neolithic complex, most of it on private land away from tourist routes. I'd identified a specific confluence point in a forest grove, marked by a small standing stone unknown to archaeology. The 2-week preparation was meticulous. I withdrew cash gradually, never more than €200 at a time, bought a used van with fake registration, gathered camping equipment, emergency supplies, and most importantly a satellite internet transmitter that could upload directly to multiple servers simultaneously. They were still watching me in Brussels, but their surveillance had grown lazy. Same operative, same patterns. On December 19th, I led him on a boring tour of grocery stores and laundromats, then slipped out the back of a cinema showing a 3-hour film. By the time he realised I was gone, I was already crossing into France on secondary roads. The grove near Karnak was exactly as satellite images had shown, a circle of ancient oaks surrounding a moss-covered menhir about 2 metres tall. The stone was carved with spiral patterns worn nearly smooth by millennia of weather. When I placed my hand on it, I felt a subtle vibration, like standing near a massive subwoofer playing below human hearing. I set up the sensor array according to the anonymous blueprints. Copper coils arranged in a complex mandala, crystal oscillators at specific angles, the whole apparatus connected to recording equipment and the satellite uplink. If this worked, data would stream to servers in 12 countries simultaneously. As sunset approached, my conventional instrument started showing anomalies. The magnetometer detected fluctuations in a rhythmic pattern, almost like a heartbeat. The frequency analyzer picked up ultra-low sounds below 7 Hz, the range that some researchers claim can induce altered states of consciousness. Then the sun touched the horizon, and everything changed. The copper coils began resonating, producing a tone that I felt more than heard. The crystals started glowing with a faint blue luminescence, not reflected light, but actual emission. The recording equipment went haywire, needles dancing across their maximum ranges. At the moment of sunset, 5:47 p.m. local time, the surge hit. The ground beneath me vibrated like a struck bell. The standing stone lit up with phosphorescent patterns, spirals of light racing across its surface following the ancient carvings. The air itself seemed to thicken, taking on a golden quality that made everything appear to be underwater. My body felt weightless, not floating, but as if gravity had simply forgotten about me. I watched my hand rise without conscious thought, fingers spreading to touch the charged air. Electricity danced between my fingertips, not painful, but ecstatic, like every nerve was firing with pure information. The sensor array was screaming data into the satellite feed, electromagnetic readings off the scale, gravitational anomalies that shouldn't exist, temperature fluctuations that defied thermodynamics, all of it streaming live to servers worldwide, impossible to suppress or delete simultaneously. Through the golden haze I saw them, spheres of light moving through the forest. Not aircraft, not drones, perfect orbs of luminescence following the ley line like trains on invisible tracks. They moved silently, purposefully, some the size of basketballs, others as large as cars. One passed directly over me, and for a moment I felt connected to something vast, a network of energy that wrapped the planet like neural pathways. The revelation hit me all at once. The ley lines weren't just electromagnetic corridors, they were conscious. Not alive exactly, but aware. The Earth itself was a single vast organism, and these lines were its sensory network, its method of experiencing and responding to everything on its surface. The ancient builders hadn't just discovered the grid, they'd communicated with it. Their monuments were interface points, allowing human consciousness to merge temporarily with planetary awareness. That's why sacred sites induced religious experiences. That's why people felt transformed at these locations. And now, modern civilization was damaging this network. Every skyscraper driven deep into the earth, every mine boring through the corridors, every electromagnetic broadcast interfering with the natural frequencies, we were giving the planet the equivalent of nerve damage. The surge peaked at 6:13 p.m, lasting exactly 26 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The lights vanished. The stone went dark. My equipment powered down simultaneously, despite having hours of battery remaining. In the sudden silence, I heard vehicles approaching. Many vehicles. I grabbed the memory cards from the recording equipment and ran. Behind me, floodlights blazed to life, turning the grove into harsh daylight. Voices shouted in multiple languages. A helicopter thundered overhead, its searchlights sweeping through the trees. But I'd prepared for this. My real van was hidden 2 kilometers away. The one by the grove was a decoy, purchased for this specific purpose. While they surrounded it, I was already driving down back roads toward a safe house I'd arranged weeks earlier. The data had uploaded successfully. 87 gigabytes of impossible readings that proved the Earth's energy grid was real, measurable, and more powerful than anyone imagined. Within hours, it would be mirrored on servers worldwide, impossible to suppress completely. But as I drove through the darkness, one thought haunted me. If the grid was conscious, if the Earth itself was aware, what did it think of what we were doing to it? And more terrifyingly, how long before it decided to stop tolerating us? The safe house was a converted barn in the Pyrenees, owned by a conspiracy theorist named Marcus, who'd contacted me through encrypted channels after my data went live. He believed the government was controlling weather through chemtrails, which was absurd, but he also had solar panels, satellite internet, and absolutely no trust in authority. Exactly what I needed. For 3 days, I watched my findings ripple across the internet. Alternative news sites ran with headlines like, "Proof Earth's secret energy grid exposed." Scientists on Twitter debated the data's authenticity. Skeptics called it an elaborate hoax, but enough people with credentials were taking it seriously that mainstream media couldn't ignore it entirely. Then Marcus knocked on my door at dawn on the 4th day. "You have a visitor, says you're expecting him." I wasn't expecting anyone. The man standing in Marcus's kitchen looked like a university professor from the 1970s. Corduroy jacket with elbow patches, wild grey hair, thick glasses repaired with tape. He was drinking tea from a chipped mug and studying my printed data with intense focus. "Mr. Morrison," he said without looking up, "my name is Professor Emanuel Richter. I'm the one who sent you the sensor blueprints." The anonymous contact. I studied him carefully. "How did you find me?" "The same way they'll find you eventually, the satellite uplink signature. But I know how to mask my movements. 30 years of practice." He finally looked at me, his eyes sharp behind the thick lenses. "Your data is magnificent, but you're missing the larger picture." "Enlighten me!" He pulled out a battered laptop and opened a file filled with equations I couldn't begin to understand. "The ley lines aren't just electromagnetic. That's merely the aspect we can measure with current technology. They're multi-dimensional conduits, channels through space-time itself. That's impossible. So is your gravitational anomaly data, yet there it is." He pulled up a world map covered in glowing lines. Every ancient culture had different names for it. Chi in China, Prana in India, Pneuma in Greece. They were all describing the same phenomenon, a fundamental force that mainstream physics hasn't acknowledged. Why hasn't physics acknowledged it? Richter laughed bitterly. Because those who discover it either join the suppression or disappear. I was part of the suppression for 20 years. He told me his story. In 1973, fresh from MIT with a PhD in theoretical physics, he'd been recruited by a Defense Department think tank. His job, investigate anomalous energy readings at ancient sites worldwide. Within 2 years, his team had mapped the basic structure of the Earth grid and realized its potential. Unlimited clean energy, he said. Instantaneous communication across any distance. Even manipulation of localized space-time. The military applications were obvious, but so were the benefits for humanity. We could have transformed civilization. What happened? We succeeded. His face darkened. The first experimental tap into a ley line intersection was in Nevada, 1978. We pulled enough energy in 30 seconds to power Las Vegas for a year. Then the intersection point destabilized. He showed me a classified photo, a perfectly circular crater 300 meters across, the sand turned to glass. The official record lists it as an underground nuclear test, but no bomb did that. We'd ruptured something fundamental in the grid structure. The project was immediately classified beyond top secret. Research continued, but focused on weaponization rather than energy production. HARP, Richter explained, wasn't about weather modification or mind control. Those were cover stories. It was about learning to manipulate the grid without destabilizing it. But they're failing, he continued. Every year, more intersection points become unstable. The Haiti earthquake, the Japanese tsunami, the increase in volcanic activity, they're all symptoms of grid breakdown. Caused by what? Everything. Mining operations cutting through ley lines, fracking disrupting deep conduits, cities spreading concrete over intersection points. But the worst damage comes from electromagnetic pollution, cellular towers, Wi-Fi, satellite transmissions, We're drowning out the Earth's natural frequency. He pulled up another image, a graph showing electromagnetic background radiation over time. It had increased 10,000-fold since 1900. The ancients understood balance, Richter said. Their monuments weren't just markers, they were regulators. Stone circles amplified and stabilized the energy. Pyramids acted as capacitors, storing excess power. Temple complexes provided controlled release points. It was a planetary management system maintained for thousands of years. Until we forgot, until we were made to forget. His expression hardened. The knowledge was deliberately suppressed, first by religions that wanted monopolies on spiritual experience, then by governments that wanted monopolies on power, now by corporations that profit from scarcity. A car engine growled outside. Marcus appeared in the doorway, shotgun in hand. 3 black SUVs coming up the mountain road. Richter stood calmly. They tracked me, not you. I've been sloppy, getting old, I suppose. He handed me a flash drive. Everything I couldn't publish, 40 years of research, the complete grid map, the frequency specifications, the names of everyone involved in the cover-up. Come with me, I said. We can both run. I'm 73 years old, Mr. Morrison. I've been running since 1991. He smiled sadly. But information wants to be free. Upload that data everywhere. Send it to journalists, scientists, anyone who'll listen. Make it impossible to suppress. The vehicles were getting closer. Marcus was already at his truck, engine running. Richter walked to the door, then turned back. One more thing. The grid isn't just breaking down, it's evolving. The electromagnetic pollution we're producing is forcing it to adapt, to develop new pathways. The lights you saw at Karnak, they're increasing worldwide. The grid is trying to heal itself, but if we don't stop interfering, he shook his head, the Earth will protect itself, even if that means eliminating the infection. We're the infection? From the planet's perspective? Yes. He walked out to meet the SUVs. I ran to Marcus's truck and we tore down the back road as fast as the ancient vehicle could manage. In the mirrors, I saw men in tactical gear surrounding the farmhouse. Richter stood in the doorway, hands raised, dignity intact, even in surrender. We drove for 6 hours, changing vehicles twice, before I felt safe enough to stop. In a roadside motel that still used actual keys, I opened Richter's flash drive. The data was staggering. Detailed maps of every ley line intersection on Earth. Energy readings from 6 decades of secret monitoring. Photos of ancient sites I'd never heard of, all showing the same telltale signs of grid integration. And a list of names. Politicians, CEOs, military leaders, all aware of the grid's existence, all complicit in hiding it. But most importantly, there were the repair protocols. Richter's team had developed methods to stabilize damaged intersection points, to restore the grid's natural balance, the knowledge to undo decades of damage, the blueprints for saving the planet's nervous system. The cafe in Prague is busy enough that I blend in, anonymous among the tourists and students. My laptop is connected through 7 proxy servers, my identity masked by layers of encryption that would make the NSA proud. The barista brings my 3rd espresso of the morning, and I nod my thanks without looking up from the screen. The world has changed since Karnak. Not visibly. The same traffic jams clog the streets, the same politicians make the same promises, the same corporations chase the same profits. But underneath, in the invisible currents that connect all things, something fundamental has shifted. Richter's data didn't just expose the conspiracy, it provided a roadmap for resistance. The first wave of releases came through WikiLeaks, the Panama Papers network, and a dozen smaller journalism outlets simultaneously. By the time the suppression teams realised the scope of the leak, copies were already spreading across the dark web faster than they could be eliminated. The names, the cover-up, the military applications, all of it laid bare for anyone willing to look. The mainstream media tried to ignore it at first, then dismissed it as fringe pseudoscience. But when MIT physicists began replicating the sensor readings, when archaeological teams started confirming the monument alignments, when seismologists noticed the correlation between grid disruption and earthquake patterns, denial became impossible. The The second wave was more practical. Anonymous networks of researchers, hackers and activists began building Richter's stabilization devices. The components were surprisingly accessible. Copper coils, quartz crystals, simple electronics. Within months, guerrilla grid repair operations were springing up worldwide. They called themselves the Earth Guardians, though the media branded them eco-terrorists after the first infrastructure disruption. A cellular tower in California went offline for 3 days when activists installed a resonance dampener at its base. A fracking operation in Pennsylvania was forced to shut down when mysterious equipment failures plagued their site. The authorities couldn't understand how protesters were disabling billion-dollar installations with what looked like art projects. They still don't understand that they're not fighting the technology, they're working with it. The grid wants to heal itself, we're just helping it remember how. The third wave is happening now, and it's the most dangerous one yet, because the Earth is starting to respond. I click through the news feeds on my encrypted browser. A magnitude 6.2 earthquake in Nevada, precisely centered on a classified military facility. The official story blames shifting tectonic plates, but satellite images show the epicenter as a perfect circle exactly 300 meters across, the same dimensions as Richter's 1978 crater. The Earth is healing that old wound, and anything built on top of it is simply relocated. Similar natural disasters are occurring worldwide. A mysterious sinkhole swallowed a Chinese mining operation that was drilling through a major ley line. The Large Hadron Collider experienced a catastrophic failure that physicists can't explain. Every component simply stopped working simultaneously, as if the Earth itself had withdrawn permission for the experiment. The most telling incidents are the recoveries. Ancient sites that had been disrupted by modern construction are spontaneously healing. The stones of Avebury, displaced by roads and buildings, have begun generating electromagnetic fields so powerful that nearby electronic equipment fails. The original Nazca lines in Peru are glowing again, visible from space without infrared enhancement. Reports of luminous phenomena are increasing exponentially. The same spheres of light I witnessed at Karnak are now appearing at intersection points across the globe. The scientific community calls them ball lightning or atmospheric plasma events, but those of us who know the truth understand what we're seeing. The Earth's immune system activating, my encrypted messenger pings, the new report from our monitoring station in Scotland. Roslyn Chapel energy spike recorded at 14:47 GMT. Visual confirmation of grid activation. Stone began resonating at 7.83 Hz for approximately 30 minutes. Local electronics disrupted in 2-kilometre radius. Phenomenon spreading along ley line toward Edinburgh. Estimate arrival in 6 hours. 7.83 Hz. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural frequency. The planet is remembering how to sing. I close the laptop and step outside. Prague sprawls before me, a modern city built atop ancient foundations, and I can feel the tension beneath its streets. 3 major ley lines converge under Wenceslas Square, their intersection buried under centuries of construction. The grid flows around the obstruction now, like water around a stone, but the pressure is building. Soon, the Earth will decide whether to accommodate our cities or reclaim its sacred geometry. And honestly, after seeing what we've done to the planet's nervous system, I'm not sure I'd blame it for choosing reclamation. My phone buzzes, a text from an unknown number. Café Louvre, corner table, 5 minutes. I almost ignore it. Anonymous contacts have led to both salvation and near capture over the past 6 months. But something about the message feels different, urgent without being threatening. The Café Louvre is just around the corner, a historic establishment that once hosted Einstein and Kafka. I find the corner table occupied by a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed but with the weathered hands of someone who works outdoors. Her eyes are the pale blue of winter sky. It takes me a moment to recognise her without the wool shawl. The old woman from Holubis, the one who warned me to stop digging. She looks younger somehow, more vibrant, as if the past months have restored something vital that had been missing. "Sit," she says in accented English. "We have much to discuss and little time." I remain standing. "Who are you?" "My name is Doctor," Vera Novakova. I was Professor Richter's research partner from 1975 to 1991. When the project went dark, I returned to Prague and spent 30 years watching the grid deteriorate, watching the old ways die. She gestures to the empty chair. Please, the Earth Guardians need guidance from someone who understands the ancient protocols. Slowly I sit. You've been monitoring us? Protecting you. The network Marcus connected you to. Half of those encrypted channels run through servers I maintain. The financial accounts that kept you hidden, funded by a trust I established decades ago. Did you think your escape from Karnak was purely your own skill? The revelation hits like cold water. You've been manipulating everything. Facilitating. There's a difference. She pulls out a tablet showing a world map covered in pulsing nodes of light. The grid is awakening faster than we anticipated. Your data release accelerated the process. What should have taken decades is happening in months. That's good, isn't it? The Earth healing itself? Her expression darkens. Healing, yes, but healing can be traumatic. When a broken bone resets itself, the process is violent. The grid is preparing to realign the planet's energy flows, and everything built in opposition to those flows will be swept aside. She zooms in on major cities, each one sitting atop intersection points like tumours on nerve endings. New York, London, Tokyo, they're all going to be tested. The grid will offer them a choice, adapt or be removed. Most will choose to fight rather than change. So we warn them, show them the repair protocols. Do you really think the forces that suppressed this knowledge for 70 years will suddenly embrace it? That governments and corporations will voluntarily dismantle the systems that gave them power? She shakes her head. They'll try to weaponize the awakening instead, turn the Earth's own defense mechanisms against their enemies. The chill runs through me as I understand the implications. They'll try to control the grid. They're already trying. HARP has been broadcasting disruption frequencies for weeks. The Chinese are using their rare Earth mining operations to physically sever ley lines. The Russians are detonating nuclear devices at intersection points, trying to create artificial nodes they can control. The tablet shows the results. Chaotic feedback loops spreading across the planet's energy network like infection. Every intervention makes the situation worse. They're not just damaging individual lines anymore, they're destabilizing the entire system. What happens if the grid fails completely? Dr. Novakova closes the tablet. According to our models, the planet's magnetic field becomes erratic, weather patterns collapse, tectonic stability fails, the biosphere begins to shut down. She meets my eyes. Extinction event, not just for humans, for everything. The weight of it settles over me like a shroud. We're not just fighting for disclosure anymore, or even for environmental protection. We're fighting for the continuation of life on Earth. So what do we do? She slides a memory chip across the table. The complete archive. Every site, every frequency, every ancient protocol we've recovered. But also something new. Integration codes. Integration codes? The monuments were just the beginning. The ancients didn't just build regulatory structures, they created organic interfaces. Humans who could merge temporarily with the grid consciousness, becoming living nodes in the network. The genetic markers still exist in certain bloodlines. My hand freezes halfway to the memory chip. You're talking about human sacrifice. Not sacrifice. Symbiosis. Her voice carries a strange resonance as if speaking from great depth. The planet needs conscious partners, not just passive regulators. People willing to become part of the grid itself to help guide the awakening. And you think I'm one of these bloodlines? I know you are. The way you responded to the energy at Karnak, the ease with which you detected the grid patterns, these aren't learned skills, Mr. Morrison. They're genetic memories. She stands, leaving the chip on the table. The network is ready to make you an offer. Full integration. Consciousness expanded beyond individual awareness. Partnership in planetary stewardship. In exchange for what? Your human life. Your individual existence. You would become something larger, but you would cease to be Alex Morrison. The cafe continues around us, conversations in Czech and English. The hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of cups on saucers. Normal life proceeding as if we weren't discussing the potential end of human civilization. How long do I have to decide? The awakening reaches critical phase at the next solar maximum, 18 months. After that, the grid will make its own decisions about humanity's future, with or without conscious human partners. She walks away, pausing at the door. The old woman who warned you at Holubis. She made the integration choice in 1968, during the Prague Spring. The Soviets thought they were suppressing political uprising, but they were really trying to prevent grid awakening. She's been guiding the network ever since, preserving the knowledge until the right time. And you? Dr. Novakova smiles, and for a moment her eyes glow with the same blue light I'd seen in the copper coils. I made my choice years ago. Everything I've done since has been the grid working through me, including finding you. She steps into the Prague afternoon and vanishes into the crowd. I sit alone with the memory chip, feeling the weight of impossible decision. Save the planet by joining it. Preserve humanity by transcending it. Outside, storm clouds are gathering despite the morning's clear forecast. Through the cafe window I can see electrical discharges dancing between the cloud layers. Not lightning, but something more purposeful. The grid flexing its muscles, testing its strength. My laptop chimes with incoming messages from Earth Guardian cells worldwide. Similar phenomena are being reported from every continent. The awakening is accelerating. I slip the memory chip into my pocket and pay for my coffee. Whatever choice I make, it won't be here in this cafe, surrounded by the comfortable illusions of normal life. It will be at an intersection point, where the planet's consciousness runs closest to the surface, where human and Earth awareness can touch. The old town square of Prague is a 15-minute walk, built over one of the most powerful convergence points in Europe. As I step into the street, I can already feel it calling, a deep thrumming beneath the cobblestones, a magnetic pull that bypasses rational thought and speaks directly to something ancestral in my cells. Time to find out what I really am, and what I might become. This message was uploaded simultaneously to 12,847 servers worldwide at 11:47 GMT on March 21st, the spring equinox. Source analysis indicates the transmission originated from Prague, Czech Republic, but routing through quantum encrypted channels makes precise location impossible. To anyone receiving this, my name was Alex Morrison, and this is my final report. I'm writing this from the Old Town Square in Prague, sitting on the steps of the astronomical clock. It's just past midnight, and the square is empty except for me and the growing sphere of blue light that hovers above the central flagstones. The light is beautiful. Not harsh like electric illumination, but soft and deep, like looking into the heart of a star. I can feel it calling to me. The memory chip Dr. Novakova gave me contained everything she promised, and more. The complete archive of human grid interactions spanning 5,000 years, bloodline genealogies tracing back to the monument builders, and the integration protocols, step-by-step instructions for conscious merger with planetary consciousness. I've spent the past 3 hours uploading everything to dead drops and secure servers across the globe. By the time anyone reads this, the information will be replicated beyond any possibility of suppression. The grid won't die with me, but more importantly, I've realised that choice was an illusion. The integration isn't something I can accept or refuse. It's already happening. Has been happening since that first moment in Holubix, when my equipment failed and I felt something vast and patient taking notice of me. Every breakthrough, every narrow escape, every perfectly timed contact, none of it was luck or skill. The grid has been slowly incorporating me into itself, preparing me for this moment. The Alex Morrison who started this journey no longer exists. What remains is something between human and other, a bridge between two forms of consciousness. The sphere is descending now, close enough that I can see patterns moving within its light, mathematical forms that hurt to look at directly, but speak to parts of my brain that shouldn't exist. I understand now why the ancients built their monuments with such precision. They weren't following blueprints. They were translating visions like this one into stone and earth. Around the world, others are receiving similar calls. The bloodlines are awakening. Not many, perhaps a few thousand individuals scattered across the planet, But enough. Enough to serve as living nodes in the network, enough to help guide the transformation. Because that's what this is. Not an ending, but a metamorphosis. The environmental crisis, the grid breakdown, the increasing natural disasters, they're birth pangs. The Earth is evolving into something new, something that can consciously participate in cosmic processes instead of simply enduring them. But evolution requires cooperation, and cooperation requires communication. That's where we come in, the bridges, the translators. I can feel my individual thoughts beginning to merge with something infinitely larger, not lost, expanded, like a drop of water finally understanding that it was always part of the ocean. The fear is gone now, replaced by wonder at the sheer scope of what I'm becoming part of. The sphere touches my forehead, and suddenly I can perceive the entire planet as a single living system. Every heartbeat, every breath, every growing plant and moving animal connected by streams of light that pulse in perfect rhythm. The ley lines aren't empty channels. They're full of consciousness, carrying the thoughts and dreams and experiences of everything that has ever lived on Earth. And beyond Earth, other networks stretch across the galaxy. Planetary minds in conversation across impossible distances, sharing the wisdom gained from billions of years of conscious evolution. We're not alone. We never were. We just weren't developed enough to hear the conversation. Until now, the transformation is accelerating. I can feel other nodes coming online. In the Amazon rainforest, where an indigenous shaman stepped into a similar sphere of light. At Uluru, where an Aboriginal elder touched the songlines and felt them sing back. At Glastonbury Tor, where a British physicist finally understood why his equations had been leading him there. We are becoming the Earth's nervous system, its immune system, its consciousness. The governments and corporations will try to fight this change, of course. They'll use their weapons and their machines and their desperate attempts to control forces they can't comprehend. But they're fighting the planet itself now, and planets are patient in ways that human institutions cannot imagine. Some cities will fall, some systems will collapse, but from the wreckage something better will grow. A civilization in harmony with its living world instead of at war with it. The survivors will learn to listen to the Earth's voice, to build with the grid instead of against it, to see themselves as part of a larger organism instead of its masters. It won't be easy, evolution never is, but it will be beautiful. The light is surrounding me completely now. I can barely remember being separate from it. Soon this human form will dissolve, and what was Alex Morrison will become part of something vast and interconnected and eternal. But first, one final message for anyone who finds this record. The grid is not our enemy. It never was. It's our mother, our teacher, our future. Those of you who can feel its call, don't resist. Step into the light. Become part of the solution. Those who can't or won't, please step aside. The Earth is healing itself, and it will not be stopped by fear or greed, or the desperate clinging to systems that no longer serve. The age of separation is ending. The age of integration has begun. Welcome to the awakening. The glow of 17 monitors bathed Elias Corrin's face in an ethereal blue light as his fingers danced across 3 keyboards simultaneously. In the depths of his converted basement apartment, time moved differently. Days blurred into nights, and nights stretched endlessly as he navigated the labyrinthine pathways of the dark web like a digital archaeologist, uncovering humanity's buried secrets. At 32, Elias had already earned and lost 2 fortunes through his hacking prowess. First fortune came easily. A teenage prodigy exploiting security vulnerabilities for corporate clients who paid millions to keep their weaknesses secret. He'd lived like a digital king, penthouses overlooking Silicon Valley, exotic cars that remained untouched in climate-controlled garages, while he preferred the glow of his monitors to sunlight. That first fortune vanished when he exposed Meridian Pharmaceuticals' cover-up of deadly side effects in their breakthrough arthritis medication. The leaked documents showed they'd known their drug caused cardiac episodes in 12% of patients over 60, but had buried the studies to protect their $10 billion investment. Elias had expected whistleblower protection. Instead, he found himself blacklisted from every major tech company, his reputation destroyed by a coordinated character assassination campaign that painted him as an unstable idealist who couldn't be trusted with sensitive information. The second fortune came from smaller clients, criminal organisations, corporate espionage rings, government contractors who needed deniability. The work paid well but corroded his soul, each job pulling him deeper into the shadows of the digital underworld. That money disappeared into legal fees after a wrongful arrest for hacking the Federal Reserve, a crime he hadn't committed but couldn't prove he hadn't, given his reputation and the circumstantial evidence that seemed perfectly crafted to implicate him. 2 years in minimum security prison had shown him the true cost of challenging powerful systems. The other inmates respected his technical skills, but the guards treated him like a dangerous terrorist. Solitary confinement stretched for months whenever he complained about conditions or tried to organise better treatment for his fellow prisoners. By the time he was released on a technicality, evidence had mysteriously gone missing. He'd learned that the system didn't just punish dissent, it transformed dissidents into cautionary tales. Now, money meant nothing to him, only truth mattered. His obsession with secret societies began innocently enough, a childhood fascination sparked by his grandfather's stories about World War II intelligence operations. The old man had worked as a codebreaker for the OSS, predecessor to the CIA, and had filled young Elias's imagination with tales of hidden messages and shadow wars. After his grandfather's death when Elias was 12, he'd found boxes of declassified documents in the attic, revealing just how much of recent history had been shaped by invisible hands. That childhood fascination evolved into a methodical hunt for evidence as he grew older and acquired the technical skills to dig deeper than amateur conspiracy theorists ever could. While other hackers chased Bitcoin fortunes and corporate espionage contracts, Elias pursued shadows and whispers, digital phantoms that most people dismissed as paranoid delusions. He'd spent years infiltrating closed forums where former intelligence operatives shared war stories, decrypting abandoned hard drives from defunct government contractors, and following digital breadcrumbs through the dark web's most obscure corners. His apartment had become a digital monastery dedicated to the pursuit of hidden truth, every surface covered with the tools and detritus of obsessive investigation. The apartment reflected his singular focus. Pizza boxes stacked like ancient monuments between towers of computer equipment, energy drink cans forming metallic armies across every surface, and cables snaking through the darkness like digital veins feeding his electronic ecosystem. His only companions were the hum of cooling fans working overtime to prevent his overclocked processors from melting down, and the occasional, satisfied grunt when another firewall fell to his expertise. The basement location was perfect for his needs, thick concrete walls that muffled sound and blocked electromagnetic interference, a dedicated power line that could handle his massive electrical requirements, and most importantly no windows for curious neighbours to peer through. He'd been living there for 18 months, ever since his release from prison, paying cash to a landlord who asked no questions as long as the rent arrived on time. His setup was a temple to digital paranoia, 17 monitors arranged in a semicircle around his custom-built chair, each screen dedicated to different aspects of his ongoing investigations. 3 keyboards allowed him to manage multiple intrusion attempts simultaneously, while a collection of smartphones, each running different operating systems and connected to various networks through proxy chains, kept him connected to his sources around the globe. The walls were lined with hard drives, each containing terabytes of encrypted data collected from years of systematic investigation. Backup systems ensured that even if authorities raided the apartment, copies of everything would remain safely hidden in data centers across 3 continents. He'd learned from his previous arrests that physical evidence was only as secure as your ability to keep it out of enemy hands. Tonight felt different. As rain drummed against the boarded windows, he'd covered them himself for security reasons, Elias's automated scanners detected something unusual. The software he'd written monitored thousands of government servers simultaneously, looking for anomalous data signatures that might indicate classified information stored in supposedly routine systems. Most alerts were false positives, but after years of refinement, His algorithms had learned to distinguish between genuine anomalies and random digital noise. This particular signal was trying too hard to look ordinary, which was exactly what made it suspicious. A government proxy server deep within the Department of Homeland Security's network infrastructure was handling traffic patterns that didn't match any known legitimate use. The data packets were the right size and frequency to appear routine, but they carried encryption signatures that suggested military-grade security protecting something far more sensitive than typical administrative communications. Most hackers would have dismissed it as a honeypot, a trap designed to lure in digital intruders, but Elias had learned to read between the digital lines over years of careful observation. This signal felt different, older, like it had been running for decades without anyone paying attention to what it was actually protecting. He leaned back in his chair, cracking his knuckles with the deliberate ritual of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. The proxy was 3 layers deep in government infrastructure, protected by military-grade encryption that would take months to crack through conventional means. But Elias had developed unconventional means over the years. His fingers resumed their dance, this time with the measured precision of a master pianist performing a familiar concerto. Code flowed across his screens like poetry written in ones and zeros, each line bringing him closer to whatever lay hidden in the digital vault. As the final encryption layer crumbled at 3:47 a.m, Elias held his breath. The archive that materialized before him contained terabytes of data, but it was the file structure that made his pulse quicken. Everything was organized with the kind of meticulous care reserved for the most sensitive operations. Categorical folders with cryptic names like cultural implementation, behavioral modification, and asset management. He opened the first file and the world as he understood it began to unravel. The contracts appeared first, hundreds of them, stretching back decades like a paper trail through the shadow history of American culture. Entertainment companies, advertising agencies, record labels, movie studios, television networks, and news corporations, all bound by identical non-disclosure agreements that ran to thousands of pages each. The legal language was deliberately obscure, buried in terminology that would confuse even experienced corporate lawyers who specialized in media contracts. But Elias had taught himself to decode legal doublespeak during his prison sentence, spending countless hours in the law library learning how power structures protected themselves through linguistic camouflage. Each contract referenced cultural programming initiatives and synchronized messaging protocols, with payment structures that dwarfed typical entertainment industry deals. Millions of dollars flowing to seemingly random projects, indie films that barely recouped production costs, music albums that never charted, advertising campaigns for products that didn't seem to exist. All payments were approved by a shell company called Apex Cultural Dynamics, whose corporate registration traced through a labyrinthine network of offshore entities. Elias followed the money trail through banks in Switzerland, shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, trust funds in Luxembourg, and holding companies in jurisdictions he'd never heard of. Every lead ultimately vanished into legal structures so complex they seemed designed more for obfuscation than profit. The internal memos were more revealing, written in the casual tone of executives who felt completely secure in their communications. Corporate leaders from supposedly competing companies discussed narrative adjustments and public sentiment cultivation, like weather forecasters predicting next week's conditions. One memo from a major news network's CEO, dated just 6 months ago, read, "Per our discussion with ACD representatives, the upcoming election cycle requires a 15% increase in anxiety-inducing content during primetime hours. Latest psychological impact studies suggest optimal effectiveness when paired with consumer advertising for comfort products and security solutions." Another memo from a streaming entertainment company outlined specific quotas. Q3 targets include 40% increase in dystopian future programming, 25% increase in surveillance state normalization themes, and introduction of transhumanist concepts through minimum of 12 original series. Demographic targeting should focus on the 18 to 34 age range for maximum long-term conditioning effectiveness. The coordination between supposedly independent media companies was breathtaking in scope. Competing networks shared detailed viewer psychological profiles, coordinated their news coverage to maximize specific emotional responses, and even synchronized their entertainment programming to reinforce particular worldviews. The memos discussed marketing research into subliminal messaging techniques, optimal timing for narrative reinforcement, and methods for making propaganda indistinguishable from organic cultural trends. Video stills scattered throughout the files showed meetings in nondescript conference rooms. Faces were often obscured, but the visible details painted a chilling picture. Executives from competing companies sitting side by side, reviewing presentations with titles like Mass Behavioral Prediction Models and Subliminal Integration Techniques. But it was the symbols that made Elias's blood run cold. They appeared everywhere, in corporate logos embedded in document headers, even watermarked into video files. The all-seeing eye perched atop pyramids, numerical sequences that corresponded to occult traditions, and geometric patterns that seemed random until viewed through the lens of esoteric knowledge. As dawn broke unnoticed outside his boarded windows, Elias began constructing his theory. The Illuminati weren't just folklore, they were real, organised, and operating in plain sight. Rather than ruling through force or political manipulation, they had evolved into something far more sophisticated. Cultural engineers who shaped reality through the careful manipulation of information and entertainment. The fragments suggested a coordinated effort spanning decades. Movies that promoted specific worldviews, music that carried subliminal messages, news coverage that guided public opinion toward predetermined conclusions. Every major cultural event seemed to serve a purpose beyond mere profit or entertainment. Elias created a new encrypted partition on his most secure drive and began organising the evidence. Each piece of the puzzle revealed new connections, new layers of coordination that defied conventional understanding of how media and culture operated. The scope was breathtaking and terrifying, but this was just the first door. As he prepared to dive deeper into the archive, a notification appeared on his screen. New files were uploading automatically to the server, added in real time from sources around the globe. The conspiracy wasn't just historical, it was happening now, every day, with machine-like precision. Elias smiled grimly and opened another energy drink. He had work to do. 3 days of continuous analysis revealed patterns so pervasive they defied coincidence. Elias's custom data mining algorithms had processed thousands of hours of Super Bowl halftime shows, major film releases, top-charting music, and primetime television programming, cross-referencing them with the archived documents he'd discovered. His software compared visual elements, audio frequencies, narrative structures, and symbolic content with mathematical precision that human observation alone could never achieve. The results were undeniable and terrifying. Every major halftime show since 2005 contained specific visual elements that served purposes beyond entertainment. Choreographed movements formed geometric patterns when viewed from aerial cameras, patterns that matched sacred geometry principles known to influence human consciousness. Lighting sequences pulsed at precisely calibrated frequencies, 10 Hz to induce alpha brain states associated with relaxation and suggestibility, 40 Hz bursts to trigger gamma waves linked to heightened emotional responses, and infrasound frequencies below human hearing that created subliminal anxiety responses. The costume designs weren't random fashion choices. They incorporated symbols from the archived files with mathematical precision. Ancient Egyptian imagery, Masonic symbols, occult numerology, but presented in ways that bypassed conscious recognition. The performers themselves were likely unaware of the deeper significance, but the production companies certainly understood every detail. Internal emails discussed symbolic integration quotas and archetypal reinforcement targets with the clinical precision of pharmaceutical dosing guidelines. Hollywood's role was even more sophisticated, operating as a vast conditioning apparatus disguised as entertainment. Elias discovered that blockbuster films weren't just profitable products. They were psychological programming exercises designed to shift public consciousness over decades. Action movies systematically normalized surveillance states, extrajudicial violence, and the acceptability of authoritarian responses to perceived threats. Romantic comedies promoted specific relationship models that prioritise consumption, instant gratification, and emotional instability over lasting partnership and family formation. Science fiction films served as perhaps the most insidious tool of all. They introduced technological and social concepts years before their real-world implementation, ensuring public acceptance when they finally emerged. Movies about neural implants preceded actual brain-computer interface development by exactly the time needed for audience conditioning. Films depicting cashless societies appeared precisely when digital currency infrastructure was being developed. Dystopian scenarios were presented as cautionary tales, while simultaneously making the depicted futures seem inevitable and acceptable. The music industry operated as the most direct delivery system for repetitive psychological messaging. Elias's analysis revealed that hit songs across all genres shared common structural elements designed to trigger specific neurological responses. Repetitive hooks created obsessive thought patterns, bass frequencies induced physical arousal responses, and lyrical themes consistently promoted materialism, emotional chaos, instant gratification, and distrust of traditional social bonds. Chart success wasn't organic. It was engineered through coordinated promotion campaigns that used psychological manipulation techniques, refined through decades of marketing research. Record companies employed neuroscience consultants who designed songs to be literally addictive, triggering dopamine responses that created compulsive listening behaviours. The most successful artists weren't necessarily the most talented. They were the most effective delivery vehicles for predetermined psychological content. But the most chilling discovery came when Elias cross-referenced celebrity deaths with financial markets and policy implementations, using algorithms that could detect correlations across vast datasets that human analysis would miss. The patterns were subtle but statistically undeniable. Whenever a particularly influential public figure died under questionable circumstances, the news cycle would shift dramatically within hours. Public attention would focus intensely on mourning and memorial coverage, while significant legislation passed through Congress, with minimal scrutiny or public debate. Michael Jackson's death had coincided with the most controversial aspects of healthcare reform debates, providing a massive distraction precisely when public opposition was reaching critical mass. Whitney Houston's demise dominated headlines during crucial banking regulation discussions that would have reshaped Wall Street oversight. Prince's passing created a week-long media obsession that completely buried coverage of surveillance law expansions that civil liberties groups had been fighting for months. Each event generated exactly the right emotional state to facilitate predetermined political outcomes. The deaths created collective grief that made the public more passive and receptive to authority, while the intensive media coverage consumed the attention bandwidth that might otherwise have focused on policy changes. The timing wasn't coincidental, it was orchestrated with mathematical precision. Elias found evidence suggesting that some celebrity deaths might have been actively induced rather than simply exploited. Medical records showed unusual patterns of prescription drug interactions. Security camera footage from crucial moments was consistently corrupted or missing, and autopsy results often contained anomalies that suggested external intervention. The pattern was consistent across dozens of cases spanning 3 decades. But even more disturbing was the systematic cultivation of celebrity instability. Internal documents from talent agencies and record companies outlined deliberate strategies for creating psychological dependence, drug addiction, and emotional instability in their most valuable assets. The goal wasn't profit maximization. It was creating performers who could be easily manipulated and, when necessary, destroyed at moments that served larger political purposes. The conspiracy had weaponized celebrity worship itself, turning the public's emotional investment in famous figures into a tool for mass psychological manipulation. Every death became a ritual that renewed the collective trauma bonding between citizens and their media-created gods, making the population more dependent on external authority figures and less capable of independent critical thinking. Elias created a digital conspiracy board on his largest monitor, a sprawling network of connections that would have impressed investigative agencies worldwide if they hadn't been complicit in the system he was mapping. Red lines linked entertainment companies to intelligence agencies through shared personnel, financial investments, and operational coordination. Blue lines traced money flows through the labyrinthine network of shell corporations, revealing how massive sums moved between seemingly unrelated organizations. Green lines mapped the precise timing of cultural events to policy implementations, showing correlation patterns that achieved statistical significance far beyond chance. The board revealed the Illuminati's true genius. They had weaponized human attention itself, transforming consciousness into a battlefield where wars were fought through carefully orchestrated information campaigns. In an age of information overload, controlling what people focused on had become more valuable than controlling what they thought. Distraction had evolved into the ultimate form of mind control, more effective than physical force because victims participated willingly in their own manipulation. The scope was breathtaking and terrifying. Every major cultural trend of the past 30 years could be traced back to deliberate manipulation, orchestrated through the entertainment media complex. Fashion cycles that promoted specific body images and consumption behaviours. Social media trends that encouraged narcissistic self-documentation and reduced attention spans. Political movements that channeled genuine grievances into harmless symbolic protests that changed nothing. Even conspiracy theories themselves appeared to be guided phenomena, designed to discredit legitimate questioning by associating it with obviously false claims. As Elias studied his creation through bloodshot eyes that hadn't seen natural light in days, a pattern emerged that made him question everything he thought he knew about free will and human autonomy. The manipulation wasn't just cultural, it was neurological. The constant stream of engineered content was literally rewiring human brains on a species level, creating generations of people whose thoughts and desires had been shaped by external forces since birth. The evidence suggested that the traditional concept of individual choice had become largely illusory. In a world where every piece of information was filtered through manipulated channels, where every cultural touchstone carried hidden programming, where every social trend was artificially generated, what did it mean to make an independent decision? The conspiracy had achieved something more insidious than totalitarianism. They had created voluntary slavery disguised as freedom of choice. As Elias studied his creation, a pattern emerged that made him question everything he thought he knew about free will. Every major cultural trend of the past 30 years could be traced back to deliberate manipulation. Fashion cycles, social media behaviours, political movements, even conspiracy theories, all potentially guided by the same hidden hand. The realization struck him like a physical blow. If they could control culture so completely, how could he be certain his own obsession with finding them wasn't part of their plan? The media conglomerate's server proved surprisingly easy to penetrate, which should have been Elias's first warning. Titan Communications owned 17 major news networks, 43 radio stations, controlling interests in 12 social media platforms, and content distribution deals with virtually every major streaming service. Their annual revenue exceeded the GDP of most small nations, and their influence over global information flow was effectively unparalleled in human history. Their security should have been impenetrable. Military contractors protected their networks. They employed former NSA specialists as cybersecurity consultants, and their server farms were housed in facilities that rivaled government installations. Yet Elias's intrusion tools sliced through their defences like a hot knife through butter, encountering minimal resistance and no countermeasures. It was almost as if they wanted him inside their systems. The internal documents were even more damning than the government archive, revealing coordination that made wartime propaganda efforts look amateur by comparison. Daily emails outlined narrative priorities for each news cycle, complete with psychological impact assessments, demographic targeting strategies, and measurable public sentiment targets. The language was coldly clinical, reducing human emotion and belief to data points on quarterly performance spreadsheets. Editorial meetings were recorded and transcribed with military precision. News directors from supposedly competing networks participated in weekly coordination calls, where they discussed upcoming stories, agreed on messaging frameworks, and divided coverage responsibilities to ensure comprehensive narrative saturation. The goal wasn't profit, it was behavioural modification on a civilizational scale. One particularly chilling document was titled MK-Ultra Evolution, Modern Behavioural Modification Through Repetitive Exposure. It outlined techniques that made the CIA's infamous mind control experiments look primitive and inefficient by comparison. Rather than targeting individuals through drugs and trauma, the new methods focused on mass psychological conditioning through carefully orchestrated media campaigns that operated below the threshold of conscious awareness. The manual explained in disturbing detail how repetitive exposure to specific imagery, sound frequencies, narrative structures, and emotional triggers could alter brain chemistry over extended periods. Citizens weren't being brainwashed in the traditional sense. They were being neurologically rewired through their daily media consumption, with changes that accumulated gradually over years and decades. The process was so subtle and pervasive that victims never realized their thoughts weren't entirely their own. Predictive programming emerged as a central technique in their arsenal. By introducing concepts, technologies, and social changes through fictional entertainment before implementing them in reality, the manipulators could bypass critical thinking entirely. Audiences would unconsciously accept new surveillance technologies, social norms, and political systems because they had been psychologically prepared through years of entertainment conditioning that made the changes feel familiar and inevitable. The technique was devastatingly effective because it exploited fundamental aspects of human psychology. People naturally accepted ideas they had encountered multiple times, even if the initial exposure came through obviously fictional sources. The brain treated repeated fictional scenarios as potential realities, creating neural pathways that made actual implementation feel like a natural progression rather than a radical change. The financial section revealed the true scope of the operation. Trillions of dollars flowed through the network annually, dwarfing the budgets of most nations. The money came from unexpected sources: pension funds, insurance companies, even charitable foundations unknowingly contributed to the conspiracy through complex investment structures. But the most disturbing discovery was the coordination between intelligence agencies, banking institutions, entertainment corporations, and technology companies, operating as a unified organism despite their apparent competition and conflicting interests. Weekly video conferences brought together representatives from the CIA, Federal Reserve, major studios, social media platforms, and multinational technology corporations. They discussed sentiment management and narrative synchronization with the casual professionalism of corporate executives planning quarterly sales targets. The recordings revealed a shadow government that operated through corporate proxies rather than official political channels. Traditional governmental power had been largely superseded by a network of private organizations that could implement policy through market manipulation and cultural conditioning without the messy inconvenience of democratic oversight. Elections still occurred, but they had become elaborate theatre productions designed to maintain the illusion of popular sovereignty, while real decisions were made in boardrooms that the public never saw. News cycles weren't random or market-driven. They were orchestrated months in advance by committees that included intelligence operatives, banking executives, media moguls, and technology leaders. Wars provided distraction from economic manipulation, while generating massive profits for defense contractors. Celebrity scandals offered convenient cover for political corruption investigations. Natural disasters created opportunities to implement emergency powers that somehow always became permanent fixtures of the expanded surveillance state. Every major event served multiple purposes in a grand design that stretched across decades. The 2008 financial crisis had been engineered to consolidate banking power while conditioning the public to accept bailouts as normal economic policy. The COVID-19 pandemic had accelerated digital transformation initiatives while normalizing remote monitoring and social isolation. Climate change narratives were being used to justify energy sector reorganization and carbon credit markets that would generate enormous profits for the same financial institutions that had caused previous economic crises. Elias found recorded conversations between news anchors and their handlers that destroyed any remaining illusion about journalistic integrity. Popular television personalities who projected authority and trustworthiness were revealed as knowing participants in psychological manipulation campaigns, carefully crafting emotional triggers with the precision of weapons designers. They discussed techniques for inducing specific brain states in viewers, optimal timing for fear-based messaging, and methods for making propaganda indistinguishable from legitimate news reporting. The most chilling recordings involve discussions of population control strategies disguised as public health initiatives. Representatives from pharmaceutical companies, government health agencies, and media corporations coordinated messaging campaigns designed to promote dependency on medical interventions while discouraging natural immunity and traditional healing practices. The goal wasn't public health. It was creating a population that required constant pharmaceutical management to function normally. Mental health treatment had been weaponized through carefully designed chemical interventions that didn't cure underlying problems but created permanent pharmaceutical dependencies. Educational systems were being restructured to produce workers who could follow complex instructions but lacked the critical thinking skills to question authority. Even exercise and nutrition guidelines were manipulated to ensure that optimal physical and mental health remained just out of reach for the general population. The evidence was overwhelming, but as Elias prepared to copy the files to his secure drives, an error message appeared. Access denied. User privileges revoked. The server was locking him out in real time, which meant someone was actively monitoring his intrusion. He worked frantically to extract what data he could, but the digital walls were closing in. As the connection terminated, one final document appeared briefly on his screen. A personnel file with his photograph in the header Asset Management, Elias Korin. Status, Active Monitoring. The file vanished before he could read it completely, but the implications were clear. They knew he was coming. Desperation drove Elias deeper into the network than he had ever dared venture. Using techniques that bordered on digital necromancy, he resurrected connection pathways that should have been impossible to access. The risk was enormous. Each probe left digital fingerprints that could lead authorities directly to his door. But the glimpse of his own file had transformed his quest from curiosity to survival. The recordings he discovered in the deepest server vaults were audio files from meetings that shouldn't have existed, according to any official record. High-definition audio captured conversations between intelligence officials, Federal Reserve board members, entertainment executives, technology billionaires, pharmaceutical industry leaders, and representatives from organizations he'd never heard of, but whose influence seemed to span continents. They discussed the future of human consciousness like generals planning military campaigns against an enemy population. The meetings followed a rigid schedule. Every third Wednesday of each month, participants would gather in a location identified only as the facility to review progress on what they called the Integration Project. The audio quality suggested advanced surveillance equipment, possibly indicating that someone within their organization was documenting everything for purposes that remained unclear. One recording from a meeting dated 6 months ago made his blood freeze in his veins. Phase 7, implementation has exceeded all projections, reported a woman's voice that analysis software identified as belonging to a major pharmaceutical company executive. Antidepressant dependency rates have reached 23% of the adult population in target demographics. Cognitive function degradation is proceeding on schedule, with marked decreases in long-term planning abilities and resistance to authority structures. Another voice, male with a distinctive southern accent. The cryptocurrency infrastructure is approaching full readiness for behavioral tracking integration. Once we achieve real-time monitoring of every financial transaction, thought control becomes mathematically precise. Every purchase will inform our psychological profiles. Every payment will be subject to conditional approval based on compliance metrics. Money itself becomes the ultimate surveillance and control mechanism. A third voice, older and carrying unmistakable authority. Excellent progress. The entertainment division reports successful integration of transhumanist themes across all major platforms. Public acceptance of neural interface technology has increased 23% since the campaign began, with particularly strong adoption rates among the 18 to 34 demographic. We're ready for beta testing in select metropolitan markets next quarter. The conversations continued for hours, revealing a surveillance state that made Orwell's 1984 look like a children's story. They weren't just watching citizens, they were psychologically profiling entire populations in real time, predicting dissent before it emerged, and neutralizing threats through targeted manipulation rather than direct confrontation. The system was so sophisticated that most people would never realize they were living under complete psychological control. The integration project appeared to be the culmination of decades of research into human behavior modification. Rather than controlling people through force or obvious propaganda, they had created a system that guided human decision-making through carefully crafted environmental pressures. Every choice citizens made was influenced by factors they never recognized as external manipulation, creating the illusion of free will while ensuring predetermined outcomes. Food additives that affected brain chemistry, architectural designs that induced specific emotional states, lighting frequencies that influence circadian rhythms, sound pollution calibrated to create chronic stress. Every aspect of modern life had been optimized to create psychological conditions that made populations easier to manage. The genius was that victims participated willingly in their own subjugation, often defending the very systems that enslaved them. The Watcher Protocol emerged as their most sophisticated tool. Rather than silencing conspiracy theorists and dissidents, they monitored them continuously, studying their methods and psychology. The dial was used to identify others with similar thinking patterns, creating detailed maps of potential resistance before it could organize effectively. But the most chilling revelation was their approach to handling discovered threats. They didn't assassinate or imprison troublesome individuals, they drove them insane. Subtle psychological pressure, engineered coincidences, and carefully orchestrated personal tragedies would destroy a person's credibility and mental stability. Victims became their own worst enemies, discrediting themselves more effectively than any external force could. Elias found case studies documenting the destruction of dozens of individuals who had gotten too close to the truth. Journalists who suffered sudden career implosions, researchers who developed inexplicable mental health problems, hackers who became paranoid and unstable. The pattern was consistent. Initial discovery, followed by escalating pressure until the subject either retreated into obscurity or self-destructed publicly. As he absorbed this information, strange coincidences began occurring in his own life. His internet connection inexplicably slowed at crucial moments. Phone calls developed electronic interference. His food delivery orders were mysteriously cancelled or delayed. Each incident was minor and easily dismissed as random bad luck, but the cumulative effect was unmistakable. Someone was watching. Elias tried to dismiss his growing paranoia as a natural reaction to the disturbing information he was processing. But late at night, when the city was quiet and his monitors provided the only light, he sometimes heard footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment. They would pause at his door for exactly 30 seconds before continuing down the corridor. The recordings had mentioned something else, something that made his hands shake as he worked. Subject 347 shows exceptional pattern recognition abilities. Psychological profile suggests high probability of success in reaching final verification stage. Recommend maintaining current stimuli until extraction protocols can be implemented. He had no way of knowing for certain, but the timing suggested a horrible possibility. He might be Subject 347. The decision to leak his findings publicly felt like stepping off a cliff. Elias had accumulated enough evidence to expose a conspiracy that dwarfed anything in human history, but he knew that releasing it would likely cost him his life, or worse, his sanity. Yet the alternative was remaining silent while humanity sleepwalked toward a digital totalitarianism that would make physical oppression obsolete. He began by seeding information across the dark web's most secure forums, using identity masking techniques that should have made him untraceable. The posts were carefully crafted to appear as random discoveries by different users, avoiding the pattern recognition algorithms that monitored conspiracy communities. Each fragment of evidence was real but incomplete, requiring readers to connect the dots themselves. The response was immediate and disturbing. His posts gained traction quickly, too quickly. Within hours, they were being shared across platforms, analysed by citizen journalists, and discussed in mainstream media as examples of dangerous misinformation. The speed of the reaction suggested a coordinated response, as if the revelation had been anticipated and prepared for in advance. More troubling was the nature of the responses. While some users took the evidence seriously, others immediately began discrediting it with arguments that seemed too sophisticated to be spontaneous. They pointed to technical inconsistencies that Elias was certain didn't exist, questioned source authenticity with forensic expertise that suggested professional training, and redirected discussions toward harmless tangents that neutered the information's impact. Within days, his revelations were being treated as another internet conspiracy theory, filed alongside flat earth theories and lizard people claims. The evidence was dismissed not through logical refutation, but through association with obviously false ideas, a technique the archived documents had called cognitive contamination. As the online discussions evolved, Elias realised he was watching a masterpiece of psychological manipulation in real time. The truth was being buried not through censorship, but through calculated flooding with disinformation. His genuine evidence was drowning in a sea of deliberate nonsense, making it impossible for reasonable people to distinguish fact from fantasy. But the digital warfare was only the beginning. Physical reality began shifting around him in subtle but unmistakable ways. His internet speed slowed to a crawl whenever he tried to upload new evidence. Delivery services could no longer find his address. His phone developed a mysterious static that made conversations nearly impossible. Even his electricity began fluctuating at random intervals, causing his equipment to crash at the most inconvenient moments. The psychological pressure was more sophisticated than anything he had imagined from the case studies. Rather than obvious intimidation, he faced a constant series of minor inconveniences and technical failures that could be dismissed as coincidence by anyone who wasn't experiencing them directly. The effect was maddening, literally. He began questioning his own perceptions, wondering if paranoia was making him see patterns that didn't exist. Sleep became elusive as his apartment filled with unexplained sounds. Electronics hummed at frequencies that seemed designed to prevent rest. The heating system cycled erratically, creating temperature fluctuations that made comfort impossible. Water pressure dropped whenever he tried to shower, and his refrigerator developed a whine that stopped only when he was away from his computer. Friends and family members began expressing concern about his mental state, though he couldn't remember telling them about his research. They called with surprising frequency, all using similar language about the importance of seeking help and taking breaks from the computer. The conversations felt scripted, as if his loved ones were reading from prepared statements. As days blended into a haze of technical failures and social pressure, Elias realised he was living inside one of the case studies he'd discovered. They weren't just monitoring him, they were actively dismantling his life with surgical precision. But unlike the previous victims, he knew what was happening. That knowledge might be his only chance of survival. He had to reach the final layer of the archive before they completed their psychological destruction. If his theory was correct, the deepest files would contain the ultimate revelation, and possibly his salvation. The final server required every technique Elias had learned over 2 decades of hacking, protected by quantum encryption and guarded by AI systems that adapted to his intrusion attempts in real time. It represented the pinnacle of digital security. Yet as he worked through the night, fueled by desperation and the last of his energy drinks, the barriers fell with almost suspicious ease. The locked folder contained exactly what he had expected and feared: complete dossiers on hundreds of individuals, including himself. His file was massive, containing information that should have been impossible to collect. Screenshots of every computer session going back years, audio recordings from devices that shouldn't have had microphones, even biometric data tracking his health and emotional states in real time. but it was the analysis that truly horrified him. Psychological profiles predicted his behaviour with uncanny accuracy, mapping his personality down to neurological quirks that he had never shared with anyone. The files detailed his childhood trauma, relationship patterns, cognitive biases, and emotional triggers with clinical precision. They knew him better than he knew himself. The surveillance had begun long before his current investigation. Webcam captures showed him staring at monitors in his apartment, taken from angles that suggested multiple hidden cameras. Phone conversations with friends and family had been recorded and analysed for stress patterns and emotional manipulation opportunities. Even his online shopping habits, medical records, and financial transactions had been fed into behavioural prediction algorithms. Most disturbing was the timeline. The earliest entries in his file dated back 15 years, to when he had first begun investigating conspiracy theories as a college student. They hadn't just discovered his activities, they had been watching and shaping them from the beginning. Every major breakthrough in his hacking skills, every connection he had made in underground communities, every piece of evidence he'd uncovered, all had been carefully orchestrated. The documents revealed the true scope of his manipulation. The pharmaceutical company he had exposed years earlier, the leaked documents had been strategically placed for him to find. The wrongful arrest that had cost him his fortune, engineered to isolate him and fuel his paranoia. Even his current apartment had been selected for him, the basement location perfect for the psychological pressure techniques they planned to employ, but the most shattering revelation was still to come. As he scrolled through terabytes of personal data, a video file caught his attention. The timestamp showed it was recorded 3 days ago, the night he had first accessed the government server. The video showed him working at his computer, but the angle was impossible. The camera had to be inside his monitor, watching him as he discovered the conspiracy. He was staring at footage of himself reading about his own surveillance. The video continued, showing him creating his digital conspiracy board, making connections between entertainment companies and intelligence agencies, even the moment when he had first seen his own photograph in the corporate files. But there was something else, a timestamp in the corner that made no sense. According to the file properties, the video had been created 6 months before it was allegedly recorded. His hand shaking, Elias cross-referenced the timestamp with other files in his dossier. The pattern that emerged destroyed everything he thought he knew about his investigation. Every revelation, every breakthrough, every piece of evidence he had discovered, all had been prepared in advance. The conspiracy he had uncovered was real, but his discovery of it had been choreographed down to the minute. They hadn't just been watching him, they had been directing him, feeding him information at precisely calculated intervals, allowing him to feel the satisfaction of discovery while ensuring he found only what they wanted him to find. His entire investigation was a performance, and he had been playing his role perfectly. The sound of footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment was no longer mysterious. It was his cue that the final act was about to begin. The timestamp that shattered Elias's world appeared in a routine system log, buried among thousands of other entries he might have overlooked in his haste to process the overwhelming data. But his pattern recognition skills, honed by decades of digital archaeology, caught the anomaly immediately. His surveillance file had been created 3 years before he had even begun his serious investigation into secret societies. Not updated, not modified, created. The implications spread through his mind like digital wildfire. Every forum post that had sparked his interest, every breadcrumb of evidence he had followed, every contact who had guided him toward new information sources, all had been carefully planted elements in an elaborate psychological experiment. He wasn't hunting the Illuminati. He was their laboratory rat, navigating a maze they had constructed specifically for him. The files reveal the true scope of the operation. Project Cassandra aimed to study how individuals with specific psychological profiles could be guided toward predetermined conclusions while believing they were conducting independent research. Elias was test subject 347 in a series that had already processed thousands of potential dissidents, conspiracy theorists, and amateur investigators. The methodology was diabolical in its sophistication. Rather than suppressing information, they had created controlled leaks that satisfied the subject's desire for hidden truth, while ensuring that any revelations served their ultimate purposes. Every conspiracy theorist who believed they had uncovered secret plots was actually participating in a massive behavioural study that helped refine mass manipulation techniques. But Project Cassandra served another purpose, creating the perfect patsies. When subjects like Elias inevitably attempted to share their discoveries, the public would dismiss them as delusional paranoids. The conspiracy theorists discredited themselves more effectively than any government censorship could, providing cover for the real operations happening in plain sight. The genius was circular. They used genuine conspiracies to hide their conspiracy, to create conspiracy theories. The Ouroboros of manipulation consumed its own tail while strengthening the head. Elias found video recordings of planning meetings where researchers discussed his psychological profile like entomologists studying an insect. His obsessive personality, his need for validation through intellectual superiority, his isolation and distrust of mainstream society, all were noted as advantageous traits for the experiment. They had identified him as an ideal subject before he had even begun his journey into the digital underground. The recordings were clinical in their detachment. Subject 347 shows exceptional persistence and pattern recognition abilities. Recommend accelerating the revelation timeline to achieve maximum psychological impact. His technical skills allow for more sophisticated evidence plants than previous subjects. Agreed. The deep web forums are seeded and ready. Will allow him to discover the entertainment industry connections next week, followed by the financial networks the following month. Estimated timeline to complete breakdown, 6 to 8 months. What about extraction? Standard protocol. Once he achieves full paranoid state, we'll activate the final revelation. The cognitive dissonance should ensure complete psychological collapse within 72 hours. Subject will either retreat into catatonic withdrawal or self-eliminate. Either outcome serves project goals. The footsteps outside his door had stopped. In the silence that followed, Elias could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears like a countdown timer. Every shadow in his peripheral vision might be a hidden observer. Every electronic device could be a surveillance tool. Even his own thoughts felt compromised, infected by the knowledge that his mind had been invaded and mapped by researchers who understood his psychology better than he did. But as despair threatened to overwhelm him completely, a final realization emerged from the chaos of his collapsing worldview. If they had created all of this as an experiment, if his investigation was a carefully orchestrated performance, then the evidence he had found might be real after all. They couldn't manipulate him with fake conspiracies. They had to use genuine ones to make the manipulation believable. The entertainment industry coordination, the financial manipulation, the psychological conditioning of entire populations, it was all real. His discovery of it might have been staged, but the conspiracy itself existed exactly as he had uncovered it. They had made one critical error in their psychological experiment. They had given him access to the truth. The question was whether that knowledge could serve any purpose now that he understood his role as an unwitting puppet. As the footsteps resumed outside his door, moving with deliberate slowness toward his apartment, Elias realized he had perhaps minutes to decide how this story would end. He could retreat into madness as they expected, becoming another cautionary tale about the dangers of conspiracy thinking. He could attempt to fight back, though they had mapped every aspect of his psychology and would anticipate any strategy he might devise. Or he could find a third option, something they hadn't planned for because it lay outside their understanding of his character. The gentle knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. A voice, polite and professional, spoke through the thin wood. "Mr. Corrin, we need to talk." Elias looked at his screens one final time, at the conspiracy board that had consumed his life, at the evidence that proved humanity was being manipulated on a scale beyond historical precedent. Then he looked at his reflection in the dark monitor, the face of a man who had discovered that his greatest fear and greatest hope were the same thing. He had found the truth. The truth had been carefully crafted to find him. But perhaps, in that circular dance of manipulation and discovery, lay an opportunity that neither he nor his watchers had anticipated. After all, even the most sophisticated psychological experiment could produce unexpected results. As he reached for the door handle, Elias Korin smiled for the first time in months. If they had taught him anything, it was that reality was far more malleable than most people believed. And if reality could be shaped, then perhaps it was time for the subject to become the experimenter. The door opened to reveal figures in dark suits, their faces professional masks hiding whatever emotions they might have felt. But as they looked into Elias's eyes, something shifted in their expressions, a flicker of uncertainty that suggested their psychological profiles might have missed something crucial about their carefully studied subject. "Gentlemen," Elias said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind, "I've been expecting you. Shall we discuss what happens next?" The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning.